Every night, I share stories about encounters beyond our world to help people relax and fall asleep. But this particular story still gives me chills when I remember it. It was a sticky July evening in Springfield, the kind where the air feels heavy and the sky turns a deep, bruised purple before a storm. I was sitting on my back porch with a beer, watching the clouds roll over each other like dark waves. Thunder rumbled close enough to rattle the window frames, something I usually find strangely calming. That night was different from the start. Lightning began flashing across the sky, but one bolt stood out. Instead of the typical jagged strike, this was a perfect vertical line of bright white hanging motionless in the cloud cover. It didn't flicker or branch like normal lightning, it just stayed there. At first, I thought it might be some weird atmospheric phenomenon, but then the line moved. It bent slightly, as if with intention, then shot horizontally across the sky and disappeared behind another cloud layer. Its movement was too precise, too deliberate to be a natural electrical discharge. As the storm intensified and rain started spitting against the porch roof, I noticed something else strange. Small, irregular flashes appeared at odd angles, faint, like metallic reflections moving through the clouds. They didn't match the storm's usual pattern. Leaning forward and squinting, I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Every lightning flash made me expect the white line to reappear somewhere else, but it didn't. Something was definitely not right up there. The storm was raging outside, heavy rain obscuring my view as I tried to capture a picture from the doorway. My camera couldn't penetrate the thick sheets of water, but something more unsettling was brewing. An eerie sensation crept over me, that unmistakable feeling of being watched, despite being completely alone. The weight of the atmosphere felt almost tangible. I retreated inside where the wind battered against the house and thunder rolled in the distance. Settling by the window, I watched the rain and waited, my eyes scanning the turbulent sky. Lightning flashed regularly, but then something else caught my attention. A shape emerged, darker than the surrounding clouds, moving horizontally across the sky. It was barely perceptible at first, just a faint silhouette gliding unnaturally. No sound accompanied its movement, which struck me as odd, given the storm's intensity. The silence was conspicuous, especially when the surrounding thunder was so loud. I watched it slice through the clouds, moving against their natural drift, before disappearing behind the heavy storm cover. Rubbing my eyes, I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Pacing the living room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The storm seemed to have returned to normal, but my unease lingered. Tiny, inexplicable details kept catching my attention. Flashes of white that weren't lightning. Perfectly straight streaks hanging motionless in the air, shadows where no shadows should exist. Each observation heightened my sense that something strange was happening. The air felt different, not temperature-wise, but in a way I couldn't quite describe. Thicker, somehow more charged. Determined to understand, I stepped outside. Rain soaked me instantly as I stood on the porch, neck craned toward the darkest part of the sky, waiting and watching. A new lightning pattern emerged, subtle but distinctly different. Something was definitely out there, watching back. The storm was unusual from the start. Lightning flashed in strange, deliberate places, almost like signals. A crack of thunder startled me, and suddenly I saw it. A thin white vertical line slicing through the black clouds. I couldn't look away. The line bent slightly, following the same curve as before, then zipped horizontally across the sky, faster than anything I'd ever seen. No thunder, no follow-up flash. Just gone. The hairs on my arms stood up, and I ran inside, locking the door. Sitting on the couch, I tried to calm myself. The storm began to lose its intensity, returning to normal lightning patterns, rolling and branching as they should. I kept checking outside, but everything looked ordinary now. Just clouds, rain, and streetlights glowing through the downpour. My phone showed maybe 15 minutes had passed, but it felt like hours. I wanted to tell someone, but what would I say? I saw a lightning bolt that bent and flew horizontally. I wasn't even sure I believed it myself. Yet the feeling remained. The weight in the air, the sense that the storm was alive in a way it shouldn't be, it stayed with me long after the rain stopped. By bedtime, the sky was clearing. Stars peeking through, everything looked normal. One last check of the clouds revealed a faint streak against the stars. A thin white line moving too cleanly, too fast to be natural. Then it vanished. Friends laugh when I mention it. They say I was tired, imagining things. Maybe they're right. But now, every time a storm rolls through Springfield, I watch differently. I notice cloud movements, lightning patterns, half expecting that line to reappear, Sometimes I swear I see it, slicing through the sky like it doesn't belong. I can't explain it. I don't know what it was. But I know I saw something that wasn't part of any storm I've ever witnessed before. That night, I was running the 11:45 freight out of Fargo. It was a cold January evening, the kind that turns breath to instant smoke and leaves a crust of frost over the engine's controls. The cab was empty, which wasn't unusual at that hour, and the train was mostly silent. The night was still, broken only by the rhythmic sounds of the train rolling across the tracks, aside from the usual cargo cars. A light snow fell, softening the world outside and making everything quiet. Under the dim headlamp, the tracks glistened, almost glowing. I'd been scanning the dark horizon, looking for the next signal, when something strange caught my eye. About a mile ahead, a shape hovered just above the rails. At first, I thought it might be a maintenance crane or drone, but it wasn't moving. No lights, no tethers, just a large, dark mass hanging silently over the tracks. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. It remained perfectly still. Judging its size was difficult in the darkness and snowfall, but it felt massive, that unsettling sense of something enormous where nothing should be. I tried the radio, half expecting someone to respond, but only static answered. My hands gripped the throttle tightly as I slowed the train. When we were about half a mile away, the shape began to dissolve, seeming to melt into the air itself. In seconds, it was gone. No sound, no rush of air, just empty sky. As we reached the exact spot, something else caught my attention. The metal rails were inexplicably warm. Even through my gloves, I could feel intense heat. The surrounding air was freezing, barely 20°, but the rails felt like they'd been left under a forge. I ran my hand along them, discovering the heat stretched about 20 feet in each direction before dropping off. This made no sense. No engine had passed through in hours. Rails shouldn't be this hot. I returned to the cab, still rubbing my hands, glancing outside. The snow fell evenly, and the tracks looked completely normal under the street lamp's light. I kept driving, but couldn't shake the feeling of unseen eyes watching me. In 20 years as a conductor, I'd seen plenty of strange things. Fallen trees, wildlife, odd weather, but nothing like this. Something had happened here, something I couldn't explain. The cold winter night pressed against the cab windows as I drove, my breath coming fast. I kept glancing up, half expecting to see a dark shape near the train. Nothing was there. As I passed a small siding with old stored cars, something caught my eye, a fleeting movement on top of one car. But the snow made it hard to be sure. And when I looked directly, the siding was empty as always. My unease grew with each mile. The tracks looked normal, switches aligned, signals blinking. But something felt off. I could sense a strange warmth in the rails, an almost physical memory of something unexplained. At a curve, I pressed my gloved hand against the steel. Still warm. At the next yard, I called in a careful report. Something unusual on the tracks. I told my dispatcher, avoiding specifics. When asked about a vehicle or debris, I hesitated. No, nothing physical. Just strange heat and something I can't explain. He told me to log it, and I went home unsettled. I tried to rationalize what happened. Maybe a maintenance crew, a weird weather phenomenon, a snow reflection. But nothing explained the warmth. Steel doesn't heat itself in sub-zero temperatures without a source. The next day, I returned to the track with an infrared thermometer. Everything was cold metal, exactly as you'd expect in January. No warmth, no trace of anything unusual. Whatever had been there had vanished completely. During a coffee break, I mentioned it to co-workers. They responded with nervous laughter, suggesting fatigue or old eyes playing tricks. I didn't argue. I hadn't seen what I saw, but I could still picture it, hovering over the tracks, unmoving, mysterious. I was driving through the Mojave late one night, where the desert stretches endlessly and stars burn so bright you forget about the road beneath you. Leaving Barstow around 9, I was heading toward a friend's place near Baker, hoping to arrive before midnight. The day's heat had mostly faded, but the air still carried a dry, heavy weight that scratched at my throat. My car radio was dead, which didn't bother me. I enjoyed the quiet of the desert, though occasional gusts of wind would whip across the flat land and rattle my mirrors. Each time I'd glance in the rear view, feeling like something might be following me. About 50 miles outside Barstow, I noticed a shimmer ahead, right over the middle of the road, like one of those heat mirages you see in the desert. It was silent, and then disappeared as if it had never existed. A couple of nights later, I drove that same route again, keeping my eyes fixed on the horizon. Everything looked normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling of something invisible heating the rails beneath me. The thought made me tense every time I passed that stretch. I tried to get a clear look from the cab camera, but it didn't record anything unusual. Even the signal camera at the siding showed no movement, as if this thing had existed for just a few seconds, leaving only heat before vanishing without a trace. Work soon pushed the incident from my mind, but occasionally I'd catch myself staring out the window at night, checking the tracks and feeling my stomach tighten. That stretch of steel still feels different to me. During inspections, when I run my hand along the rails, I still remember that warmth, though it's long gone. I've been back on that route dozens of times since. I've seen deer, snow drifts, ice patches, even another freight blocking a siding, but never anything like that shape again. I don't tell people because I can't explain it, and I don't want to sound crazy. Yet every time I pass that spot at night, my eyes instinctively flick to the horizon, and I feel the same quiet unease I did that January night. I don't know what it was or why it was there. I don't know why the rails warmed under it. All I know is that it happened, and for a moment, the world was a little less predictable. That quiet stretch of track over frozen ground carried something I couldn't name, a mystery that remains unexplained, hanging in the air like a whisper. I was driving through the desert at night when something caught my eye. It wasn't normal roadside scenery. A strange shimmer hung above the asphalt, tall and wavering, almost like a distortion in the air itself. My headlights passed right through it with no reflection, which immediately felt wrong. The thing seemed aware of my presence, subtly tilting as if assessing me. No sound accompanied its movement. No hum, no wind, just this faint oscillating heat haze suspended silently over the road. The desert night felt heavier, the quiet having an almost tangible weight. Instinctively, I grabbed my phone from the passenger seat to capture what I was seeing. But the moment I unlocked it, the screen went black. When it finally came back to life, the battery had mysteriously dropped to 9%. The timing seemed impossible. I kept driving, maintaining a cautious distance. Then suddenly, without warning, the shimmer lifted straight up like an invisible curtain. In an instant, it zipped vertically into the black sky, faster than anything I'd ever witnessed. No blur, no shockwave, just instantaneous disappearance. My heart raced as I tried to process what had just happened. When I looked back, the road was completely normal. No trace remained. My phone still showed 9% with no signal, which only heightened my unease. About 10 miles later, movement on the roadside caught my attention. Small shadows darted quickly, adding another layer to this increasingly strange experience. I couldn't shake the feeling that something unusual was happening. I was driving through the desert at night, the darkness pressing in around me. Movement caught my eye, something shifting back and forth between the desert bushes. These weren't ordinary animals. The shapes were too large, too coordinated, almost floating above the ground, like the landscape was bending around them. Each time I tried to get a better look, they vanished into the blackness. My headlights eventually revealed another strange distortion, this time a smaller column hovering above a dry wash. I didn't dare get closer. My heart raced and my hands grew sweaty on the steering wheel. The car speedometer started behaving strangely, flickering erratically, and dropping from 65 to 0 before jumping back. I sped past that spot, not wanting to linger. For the next half hour, nothing unusual happened, just endless desert, and my headlights cutting through the darkness. My phone remained stubbornly at 9% with no signal. An overwhelming sense of isolation crept over me. Normally, I'm not someone who gets easily spooked, but a strange tension was building inside me. The shimmer appeared again, this time right above the road ahead. I realized I was beginning to understand its pattern, appearing, floating briefly, then shooting away. I slowed down, keeping a cautious distance. My mind screamed at me to turn around, but I couldn't look away. Suddenly, another car appeared behind me. Its headlights were dim, and it seemed to be following me precisely. I flashed my high beams, hoping it was just another driver, but there was no response, just a dark shape trailing me. I thought about pulling over, but something instinctively told me to keep driving. Strange desert encounter stories flooded my mind. My rational brain insisted there was nothing unusual happening, but my gut told a different story. The other car maintained the exact same speed, never changing lanes or attempting to pass. I wanted to call someone, but my phone remained dead. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the car vanished. No sound, no trace. Midnight found me pulling into my friend's driveway, my pulse still racing from the eerie drive through the desert. The stretch of road behind me had seemed empty, but something felt off. As I stared at the rearview mirror, I couldn't shake the sense that I'd been watched. Days later, I was still trying to make sense of what happened. Heat haze, an atmospheric anomaly, nothing explained the weird details. My dying phone, the strange shapes moving in the bushes, a car that wasn't quite real. The distortion moved unlike anything I'd seen before, defying normal physics. Weeks earlier, I'd woken around 3 a.m. to a bright bedroom, not from streetlights, but a weird, flickering glow filling the entire room. Looking outside revealed a quiet, empty suburban street. Then I noticed it, an oval of light hovering 2 blocks away, completely still and unmoving. Since that night, the desert's silence haunts me. When I'm driving, I sometimes catch a faint shimmer in the distance, just hanging there like it's waiting. My phone's battery life now draws my suspicious glances. I don't share this story often. It sounds crazy, but something happened out there in the darkness, something I can't explain. I first saw Baker's lights in the distance, promising normalcy after the empty, silent desert, but the feeling of being observed never left me. My phone stayed at 9%, and I didn't dare go back outside to investigate. Weather reports showed nothing unusual, no electrical storms that could explain the shimmering distortion hovering in the air. I've stopped driving that particular road alone. The memory lingers, a mystery that refuses to be rationalized or forgotten. Sometimes the most unsettling experiences are the ones we can never fully understand. The night felt off from the moment I noticed something strange outside. My phone screen was dimmer than usual, stuck at 92% battery. At 3:02 a.m., I watched a mysterious light slowly shrink and vanish completely, leaving the streets silent and dark. Unable to sleep, I stepped outside into the cool early morning air. The neighborhood looked completely normal, just stars, blinking streetlights, and absolute quiet. No planes, no movement, nothing out of the ordinary. Yet something felt wrong. When I returned to my driveway, I spotted my car with its headlights on. I was certain I'd turned them off before bed. My hands trembled slightly as I shut them off, trying to rationalize what might have happened. The doors were locked, with no sign anyone had been near. Back inside, my phone's battery had inexplicably dropped to 27%. I plugged it in, watching it charge sluggishly. When I tried calling my brother, the call wouldn't connect, just a series of beeps. Sitting on the couch, I noticed a dark shape at the edge of the neighbor's yard. Barely visible in the street lamp's weak light, it crouched low and remained completely still. It didn't look like an animal. When I moved to get a better view, it slipped behind the hedge and vanished. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things, but deep down, I knew something strange had happened. Here's a rewritten version. Something felt off that night. Maybe it was sleep deprivation, but Oliver wasn't helping. My cat usually sleeps soundly through the night, yet here he was pacing around, ears perked forward, tail twitching while staring intently at the window. Every time I glanced away, a feeling crept over me that something was watching from just beyond the yard. I retreated inside, pulling all the blinds shut and waiting for morning. On the couch, I tried calming myself by focusing on ordinary sounds. The refrigerator's low hum, distant cars passing somewhere in the darkness. Then my phone buzzed unexpectedly. No notifications, just a random buzz. When I checked, the battery had mysteriously dropped from 28% to 9% in what seemed like minutes. Bewildered, I switched the phone off and left it on the counter. Sleep came fitfully, with every small sound jolting me awake. The air conditioner's clicks, wind against the house, even Oliver's soft paws on the carpet seemed unnaturally loud. Morning brought pale sunlight and an apparently normal street. My phone, previously drained, now charged perfectly back to 100%. No glitches, no signs of anything unusual. I tried rationalizing the night's events, maybe sleep deprivation, city lights, an unnoticed plane, but nothing explained the hovering light that seemed to shrink and vanish, or the rapid battery drain. Throughout the day, I found myself scanning the sky and street repeatedly. My neighbor, who typically walks her dog at 3 a.m., noticed nothing strange. She laughed when I mentioned my experience, suggesting I might have been dreaming. That night, I was hypervigilant. Every lock checked, every blind closed. Oliver remained unusually alert, staying close. Around 2:45 a.m., the street lamp across from my house flickered just once. I watched for hours, but nothing more happened. Yet the memory lingers. The perfectly still light, suspended in darkness, then suddenly contracting. And my phone's inexplicable battery drain haunts me most. I can't shake the feeling that something was there, watching, just beyond perception. I know something happened that night, something I can't quite explain. It started weeks ago when I was out on my little boat, a 24T center console named the Minnow, off the northern coast of Maine. I was out later than usual, cleaning fish from earlier trips, with the moon almost full providing enough light. The water was eerily calm like syrup, with a cold that crept deep into my bones. At first I thought it was a lighthouse or another boat, but the radar showed nothing. Then it appeared, a beam of white light cutting across the water from above the clouds. It wasn't like any searchlight I'd seen before, too steady, too precise, sliding across the waves as if someone was sweeping them with a ruler. I froze. Since then, I've been haunted by strange interference. Sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I catch a faint shimmer at the edge of the neighborhood, not moving, not making noise, just there. I know if I turn my head, nothing will be there. I've thought about setting up cameras, but part of me doesn't want proof. I want to forget. My dog Oliver is different now. He's skittish at night, staring out windows, ears forward, tail twitching like he remembers something I can't see. I keep thinking about that moment, the oval of light, still and bright, shrinking until it vanished. It didn't feel like something from this world. The silence that followed made everything seem wrong. I haven't told many people. My friends would laugh, call me paranoid, say I was half asleep. But I know what I saw. I know what happened to my phone. I know Oliver sensed something too. Weeks have passed. Months. I haven't seen the light again, but some nights, in the darkness, I still find myself glancing toward the neighborhood's edge, half expecting to see that faint shimmer, waiting, watching, perfectly still. The ocean seemed different that night. Cold beyond normal, with a light that bleached the water's color and drained warmth from everything it touched. My hands went numb inside gloves as I tried to work the engine controls, fighting an instinct to flee. The beam moved strangely, sliding in a searching pattern before suddenly vanishing, leaving darkness so thick it felt like a wet blanket had been pulled over the waves. Silence surrounded me. No helicopter sounds, no drone noise, just absolute quiet. The water looked normal again, but felt colder, somehow wrong. I started heading back to the marina, keeping the engine steady, talking to myself to stay calm. Cursing the darkness didn't help, but it made me feel slightly better. A thin fog began rising off the water, moving in an unnatural way. It didn't swirl or drift like normal mist, but shifted smoothly, almost deliberately. My stomach churned, sensing something was off. The compass needle confirmed my unease, flickering and hesitating despite being far from any overhead metal. I tried the VHF radio, hoping to connect with someone, anyone. Nothing but static greeted me, and then the static itself became strange. It wasn't just electronic noise, but started sounding like breathing. A low, steady hiss that felt like someone was inhaling and exhaling right behind the speaker, close, watching. The waves continued lapping, but their sound had changed, hollow, different, and I was completely alone. My heart raced as I slammed the radio down, stealing a quick glance at the clouds. They had grown thick and low, and then I caught a glimpse of something, a faint glow barely visible behind the clouds, like a distant lantern through fog. It didn't move like any aircraft or marker light. Instead, it just hovered, unnervingly steady. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. No gradual fade, no blinking, simply gone. I tried reasoning with myself, attributing the sighting to exhaustion and the endless black water around me. But the feeling persisted, a sense of being watched from above, as if something was waiting, observing my every move. Small sounds became magnified. Waves slapping against the boat's hull, a far-off gull's cry, the motor's vibration. Everything felt heightened, and I remained on edge throughout the journey. Midway through my return, something peculiar happened. The water beneath the hull seemed to shift differently, feeling heavier somehow. I wasn't experiencing typical wave patterns or familiar currents. The boat remained stable, but my stomach told me something was fundamentally wrong. I slowed down, drifting momentarily, and noticed an eerie silence. Even the engine's hum seemed off. The ocean around me had a hollow, muted quality, as if the world had temporarily lost its depth. And the marina's lights finally appeared, it felt like entering a completely different reality. Normal, warm, human. I attempted to call the harbor master, but how could I explain what I'd witnessed? Who would believe my account of a searching light cutting across the water, or the fog moving with apparent intelligence? The compass had flickered, and the radio hissed like someone breathing. After tying up the boat, I sat in the cabin, staring through the window at the water. Everything looked serene and undisturbed. Yet an unshakable sensation lingered. The part of the ocean I'd traversed had been fundamentally altered, touched by something invisible and incomprehensible. I went home, tried to warm up and find comfort, but sleep eluded me. Behind closed eyes, I saw that white light, smooth, relentless, sliding across black water with an inhuman precision, always searching, always moving. The next morning I inspected the boat carefully. Nothing seemed damaged or out of place. The waterline appeared normal. No evidence remained of my extraordinary experience. I was out on the back deck of my house in Cedar Hill, wrapped in a blanket with a cheap thermos of coffee, on one of those rare nights when the sky was completely clear. No city glow, no haze, just a black dome scattered with an impossible number of stars. The neighborhood was dead silent. No distant traffic, no barking dogs, not even the buzz of an air conditioner. I'd been sitting there maybe 20 minutes, leaning back in my chair and staring upward, when something caught my eye. One point of light looked different. And then everything changed. Since that night, I can't shake the memory. It presses down on me, cold and precise. The boat sits tied up in the marina now, unused after dark. I take day trips, but nothing more. Sometimes near dusk, when I'm alone on the water, I feel that weight again. I remember the metallic chill in the air, how the water looked drained of color. The fog moved strange. The radio did something unexplainable. I went back out a few nights later, trying to retrace my route, but found nothing, just black, indifferent water under the moon. When I wake up at night, I see that beam sliding across my backyard, searching silently. I tell myself it was a weather phenomenon, a helicopter, something rational, but nothing fits perfectly. Nothing explains what I experienced. I've thought about telling someone, Coast Guard, scientists, friends, but who would believe me? Not the way I remember it. The light was real. The cold was real. The silence was real. What haunts me isn't the beam itself, but the idea that something could exist up there, moving with purpose, unseen, and then simply stop. I still see flashes when I blink. I hear faint hissing in quiet rooms, and sometimes I catch myself staring at the sky, wondering if it's watching back. I noticed a star that seemed sharper than the others. Not the brightest, but with an unusual clarity that made it feel closer somehow. Between sips of coffee, I kept glancing back at it. Suddenly, it blinked 3 times, perfectly spaced like a signal light. My first instinct was to think it was a plane catching the light, but there was no movement, no streak or fade. Just those 3 distinct flashes and stillness. I was instantly alert in a way I hadn't been all night. Waiting seconds passed. Nothing. Then, from almost the opposite side of the sky near the tree line, another point of light blinked. Identical flashes. Identical timing. I stared back and forth, transfixed. Neither point repeated its signal. Instead, they both began to dim. Not quickly, not like clouds passing, but a slow, deliberate fade until they vanished, leaving empty black where they'd been. I found myself standing, chair scraping against the deckboards, scanning the sky. Satellites? No. I've watched enough night skies to know their movement. These points had been fixed until they simply weren't. Sitting back down didn't ease my unease. I wasn't feeling paranoid, but certain that what I'd witnessed wasn't random. The timing was too precise, the coordination too deliberate. I tried rationalizing, atmospheric conditions, coincidence, but couldn't convince myself. The night had changed. The crickets that had been filling the air were suddenly silent. Even the leaves had stopped rustling. A thick, strange silence pressed around me. My ears began to ring. That peculiar quiet after loud sensation. I leaned forward, straining to hear anything. Minutes passed. Then a faint, high-pitched tone drifted from overhead, definitely not from the house. Something had shifted in the night, and I knew I was experiencing something beyond ordinary explanation. The first sign something was off came with a phone notification the morning after. At 2:43 a.m., the security app flagged motion in the yard. I checked the clip expecting the usual raccoons or the neighbor's cat, but what I saw was different. For 7 seconds, the grainy night vision footage looked completely ordinary. Mist hung low near the ground, the porch light casting its familiar glow. Then, in a single frame, everything changed. The yard blazed as if someone had turned on a massive spotlight, bright as midday with crystal clear shadows, but those shadows were wrong somehow. Later that night, I was sitting outside when a strange sound caught my attention. It wasn't electrical, but thin and constant like a finger tracing the rim of a wine glass, only steadier. The tone lasted maybe half a minute before cutting off abruptly. Crickets immediately resumed their chorus, as if nothing had happened. The air felt different, sharper, colder. Whether from the temperature or something else, I couldn't tell. Something made me feel like an intruder in my own space. When I looked up, a faint, perfectly straight line of light hung directly above where the first star had been. Not bright, but like a pale thread barely visible. I watched, trying to determine if it was a moonlit contrail, but it remained motionless. Then, just like the earlier lights, it slowly faded into nothing. I went inside and locked the back door, something I rarely do. Sitting in the living room, my coffee growing cold, I felt like I'd been outside for hours, though only minutes had passed. Weeks later, I'd still find myself outside at night scanning the sky, not looking for shooting stars or planes, but for something else, something waiting, fixed, unnervingly still. The lawn chairs had shadows pointing in 3 different directions, which was impossible. The maple tree's shadows split into 2, stretching away from points that didn't line up with any visible light source. Even the fence had a jagged angular shadow that cut across the grass at a weird diagonal. My house should have thrown shadows in a consistent direction, but nothing made sense. The video frame shifted abruptly from night to day and back again with no transition, no fade, no flicker, just an impossible change. I studied my phone's timestamp closely. 24308 on the bright frame, 248 on the next. No missing time. By 9 a.m., I walked outside to investigate. Everything looked normal. Chairs remained in place. The gate was shut. Wet dew covered the grass, but nothing seemed disturbed. I checked the porch light, an LED fixture that couldn't suddenly flood the yard with daylight. Those shadows bothered me most. Multiple light sources would need to be blindingly bright to create such effects, and I'd have noticed them through my bedroom blinds. But I heard and saw nothing during the night. I saved the video and showed it to Eric, my coworker who knows photography. He rewound the clip repeatedly, zooming in on the bright frame. His silence spoke volumes until he frowned and asked, "What's that?" In the upper left corner, just above the fence line, a strange detail emerged. Not quite a shape, more a sharp-edged light smear. It wasn't lens flare, too precise like a solid object reflecting light. But if it was an object, it wasn't any recognizable form. That night I sat in the living room with the porch light off and blinds slightly open. Around 2 a.m., I muted the TV and listened intently. The neighborhood was eerily silent. No cars, no voices, just occasional house creaks. At 2:40, something changed. The silence felt heavy, tangible. No distant highway hum, no tree rustling. Even my refrigerator seemed quieter. I stared, sensing something was different. My nights have started to feel off. It began with the security camera, which I'd installed hoping to catch something interesting. At first, nothing happened. I'd watch the footage each morning, seeing only a squirrel darting across at 4 a.m., but then small details started catching my eye. My shadow would look strange when I was outside at night. Sometimes it stretched impossibly far, almost reaching the fence, even though I was just a few steps from the porch. One evening, while taking out the trash, I saw a brief flicker across the lawn, like a distant strobe light that lasted just a split second. I rushed inside and pulled up the live feed. Everything looked normal, but I saved that single bright frame. Now I spend hours zooming in, examining every detail. The image is weirdly sharp, clearer than the camera's usual quality. The shadows seem wrong, not just in direction, but almost bending in ways that suggest the ground beneath isn't quite flat. I've checked everything. New batteries, different SD card, verified the wiring. The system works perfectly. Nothing unusual has happened since. Yet every night, I find myself watching the clock, waiting for 2:40. Then one night, just after 1 a.m., something else happened. I was half asleep on the couch, the TV still running, when I noticed a low, steady sound beneath the background noise. It wasn't the refrigerator or the television. This was deeper, a bass note you could almost feel more than hear. I muted the TV, but the hum remained. Not loud, but heavy, like it was pressing against the air. When I stood and walked toward the front door, the sound grew stronger. Outside, my suburban cul-de-sac was completely silent. No cars, no people, just this persistent, underlying vibration that seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. A low humming was coming from outside. As I stepped onto the porch, a cluster of lights caught my eye, hovering a few hundred feet above the row of houses across from me. What I saw defied easy explanation. These weren't ordinary lights. Initially, I thought they might be part of one large object, but watching closely revealed something stranger. About a dozen lights moved with an uncanny coordination, like a school of fish changing direction simultaneously. They weren't blinking like typical airplane lights, but glowed a solid white with a slight bluish tinge, each equally bright. Their formation was constantly shifting. One moment they'd cluster tightly into an almost perfect ball, then instantly spread out, then compress again. These changes happen with shocking abruptness. No gradual movement, just instant repositioning, as if someone was swapping out frames in a film. Fascinatingly, the humming seemed connected to their movements. When the light spread, the sound lowered. When they compressed, the pitch rose slightly. Not dramatically, but noticeably. I moved from the porch into the driveway, eyes locked on the sky. They drifted slowly westward, but not in any predictable path. Every few seconds, they'd jerk into a new formation, always moving in perfect unison. Their size and distance were impossible to determine. They'd appear closer, then farther away, as if the entire group was shifting depth in the sky. The night was eerily silent. No wind, no crickets, no distant highway noise, just the persistent hum. I wanted to grab my phone but felt paralyzed by the idea of looking away even momentarily. As they approached overhead, they transformed into a long, narrow line stretching across the entire cul-de-sac. Then they tilted, as if rotating on their side, and began climbing into the clouds. The humming peaked, then dropped sharply. In less than 2 seconds, they were completely swallowed by the low cloud cover, and then absolute silence. I remained rooted to the spot, processing what I'd just witnessed. The cabin sits on the edge of a small lake, maybe 20 minutes outside a town that barely has a gas station. Light pollution is almost zero here, with only starlight, my camera's display, and a recently switched-off porch bulb providing any illumination. It was late September, around 11 p.m., cold enough that my breath was visible in the air. I was out on the deck behind my cousin's cabin in northern Maine, attempting to capture long exposure shots of the Milky Way. My equipment was simple: a tripod, a thermos of coffee, and a folding chair. My cousin Jamie had already gone to bed, needing to be up early and not interested in sitting out in the cold just to stare at the sky. The night was eerily calm. No wind, no insects, no distant traffic. The silence was so complete that sitting still long enough made you acutely aware of your own heartbeat. Occasionally a loon's call would break the stillness across the lake, but otherwise it was dead quiet. About 40 minutes into my photography session, with my camera facing southwest and Orion low on the horizon, something extraordinary happened. I was midway through a 20-second exposure when a streak of bright white light appeared. It moved diagonally downward for 2 seconds, then made a perfect, instantaneous 90-degree turn to the left, shooting horizontally until it vanished. The movement was unnatural. No curve, no arc. It was as if the light had hit an invisible wall and simply changed direction, maintaining its speed. Completely silent. I froze, hands suspended. Later, I checked the local news, hoping someone else might have reported something unusual. Nothing. No mentions of strange lights, low-flying aircraft, or weird weather. The sound I'd heard never repeated. But even now, late at night, when everything is quiet, I sometimes find myself muting the TV, just to be sure. I stood there for a good minute, staring at the spot where it had been. The clouds above were faintly lit by streetlights, but no trace remained. Walking to the end of the driveway, I half expected something to reappear, but nothing did. When I finally went inside, the clock on my cable box read 124. Though I was certain I'd been outside for less than 5 minutes, it felt much longer. My hands were cold, despite the mild air when I'd first stepped out. I was out on the deck photographing the night sky, my camera set up on a tripod, when something caught my eye. A strange streak moved across the darkness, not like anything I'd seen before. It wasn't a meteor or a plane. The object changed direction in a way that defied explanation, sharp and geometric. I kept my camera running, determined to capture whatever it was. After it vanished, I continued shooting for another half hour, scanning the sky constantly. Nothing else unusual appeared. When I finally went inside the warm cabin, my hands felt oddly cold, as if the night's chill had seeped into my bones. Later, reviewing the photos on my laptop, I was stunned. The frame where the object should have been was completely empty. No streak, no blur, nothing. The surrounding shots looked identical, with perfectly crisp stars. I checked everything, timestamps, framing, zoomed in meticulously. No shake, no motion blur. The image was pristine. I ran through every possible explanation. Too fast for the camera, but plane lights would show. Satellites leave trails. Hallucination. The movement had been too precise. When Jamie wandered by and saw me investigating, I showed him the images. He just muttered, "Weird," and went back to bed. The next morning, I examined the deck's line of sight. Trees and shoreline blocked any potential ground-based light source. A cloudy day prevented further investigation, but that night I returned to the same spot. I waited, patient and alert. Around 12:30 a.m., something appeared again. The night was dark, and the sky seemed different. A pale, almost grey light drifted slowly across the sky, then suddenly stopped moving. I stared, wondering if it might be a satellite hovering momentarily. But in an instant, it shot upward in a quick burst and vanished completely, not fading, just gone as if someone had flipped a switch. I immediately checked my camera, but like before, nothing was captured. The stars looked perfectly normal, with no blur or unusual bright spots. Something about the experience made me want to get back inside quickly. Later that week, after returning home, I started searching online for any information about strange lights over the lake. I looked into satellites, space debris, and military aircraft, but nothing matched what I'd witnessed. The story took an even more intriguing turn when I showed the photos to my astronomy enthusiast friend. I didn't mention what I'd seen, simply handing him the shots and asking his opinion. He carefully examined the images, pausing on the first night's photo. "This one's strange," he said, pointing to a small dot in the bottom corner that I'd never noticed. When he zoomed in, we discovered it wasn't a typical round star, but a perfect tiny triangle. Years have passed since that night. I've returned to the cabin several times, always with my camera, but I've never seen anything similar again. The RAW file confirms the triangle's existence, ruling out any compression issues. It appears in only that single image, nowhere near where I'd seen the light streak. Even now, when the sky is clear, I find myself watching that same patch, just in case something unexpected might happen. It was late when I left Kevin's place, close to midnight. His home sits about 40 minutes from my rented apartment, out in the countryside. Earlier rain had given way to a thick fog, blanketing the hills. Instead of taking the highway, I chose the back road, shorter, but darker, and with barely any shoulder. I'd driven this route countless times, yet that night felt different. The fog was so dense that my high beams only made visibility worse. I kept my speed low, ran 30 miles an hour, with only the hum of tires and occasional dashboard rattle breaking the silence. Occasionally, I'd catch brief glimpses of the landscape through the thick mist. I'd caught glimpses of the moon through gaps in the fog, a pale, hazy disk with minimal light. My car was descending a long, tree-lined slope when everything changed. The moon's soft glow suddenly vanished, completely obscured as if someone had thrown a massive tarp across the sky. The car's interior plunged into darkness. This wasn't just a passing cloud. The fog remained unchanged. Something enormous hung overhead, invisible yet distinctly present. No discernible edges or outline, just a massive void blocking all moonlight. It stretched beyond the road's boundaries in both directions, hovering silently for 5 or 6 seconds before moving on. I hadn't realized how much I'd slowed down until I glanced at the speedometer. My hands were rigid on the steering wheel. Just as abruptly, moonlight returned, dim and milky through the fog, and I continued driving as if nothing unusual had occurred. A mile later, I pulled onto a gravel turnout overlooking a small valley, needing to catch my breath. I rolled down the window, half expecting to hear distant engines or a low hum. Instead, complete silence greeted me. Even the usual evening chorus of frogs and crickets had vanished. Stepping out, the first thing I noticed was the fog's temperature. It wasn't cool anymore, but warm, like walking into a steamy bathroom after a shower. My jacket dampened instantly, and the air clung unnaturally to my skin. The gravel beneath my boots was slightly wet, though the warmth seemed to emanate from the atmosphere itself, not the ground. I stood scanning the sky, the thick fog limiting visibility to just a few yards. Despite expecting some movement above, I saw nothing. Then a sound emerged from the trees behind me, not from any animal I recognized. A faint rustle mixed with an irregular, low clicking. It would pause briefly, then restart, each time drawing slightly closer. My phone's flashlight beam merely reflected off the fog, creating a grey wall. I tried convincing myself it was just branches shifting, but the air remained completely still. I drove home late that night, the fog thick and heavy around me. Every time I passed under a dense patch of trees, the air felt oppressive. My car's heater ran, but it couldn't shake the dampness that seemed to have followed me inside. The windshield fogged up despite the defroster, and my breath was visible in the cabin. About 10 minutes from town, the fog started to thin. Suddenly, the temperature felt normal again. Sounds returned. Insects chirping, frogs croaking, a distant dog barking. Whatever strange feeling I'd experienced seemed to vanish beyond the hills. When I got home, I went straight inside without unloading the car. My clothes remained damp, carrying an earthy metallic scent that lingered until I washed them the next day. I've driven that road since in various weather conditions, and nothing similar has happened. Yet I still find myself glancing at the sky when I pass that turnout, just in case. Later that night, around 12:45 a.m., I was in bed scrolling on my phone. The house was quiet, with just the fridge's soft buzz in the background. Then I noticed another sound, so low it felt more like a chest vibration than actual noise. I set my phone down and listened carefully. The sound wasn't coming from inside. When the fridge switched off, the hum became clearer, a deep, steady noise from outside. Curious, I went to the front window and peeked through the blinds. The street was empty, no cars or people in sight. Stepping onto the porch, I felt the cool, still air with its faint, damp asphalt smell. The humming intensified immediately. It wasn't loud, but it felt substantial, almost tangible. Then I saw the lights hovering above the houses across the street, maybe 200 or 300 feet up, in a tight cluster. They moved like nothing I'd ever seen before. A dozen pale blue or white points, bright as stars, but without the usual twinkle. Their motion defied explanation. Not circling, not linear, but shifting like a school of fish, making instantaneous, jarring changes. They'd dart one way, freeze, slide sideways, then tilt in a completely different direction, without any transitional movement. The accompanying hum seemed alive, fluctuating with their movements. Lower when they spread out, higher when they clustered together. Unconsciously, I walked halfway down my driveway, transfixed. These weren't massive lights, but their behavior made them feel uncomfortably close. Each shift triggered a visceral response in my gut, as if they were deliberately breaking every physical rule I understood. No mechanical sounds interrupted the profound silence, no rotor buzz, no jet engine. Even the distant highway noise had vanished. The formation approached, though drifting doesn't capture their precise movement. They glided as if on invisible tracks, slowing just above the neighborhood's roof lines. From my vantage point, I could see open air between them, no physical connection anchoring their presence. For half a minute, they hovered, silently reforming and shifting. The thought of grabbing my phone felt wrong. Looking away might make them disappear. Then, simultaneously, they began climbing, seemingly pulled upward. The hum's pitch rose, not in volume but in intensity, creating a pressure in my ears. They entered a low cloud bank above the streetlights and vanished instantly. The humming stopped abruptly, like a switch had been flipped. The subsequent silence felt different, not just quiet, but fundamentally empty. I stood staring at the cloud cover, waiting. Nothing returned. When I finally went inside, my clock read 108. Though I'd been outside only minutes, my hands were cold, as if I'd endured a much longer exposure. The next day's local news and weather reports showed no aircraft activity, no explanation. The night was quiet, almost unnaturally so. Walking Jasper through the neighborhood park, I noticed something felt different. The streetlights seemed dimmer than usual, casting a soft glow on the wet ground from earlier rain. A damp smell of leaves and soil hung in the air, heavy and thick. Jasper, my older golden retriever, moved slowly as always, setting our pace. Halfway through the park, I realized the silence was complete. No cars rumbled nearby, no wind rustled the trees, no traffic light hum broke the stillness. It was as if someone had muted the world. That's when I saw them. 3 perfectly white lights hanging in the sky just above the park's edge. They weren't like stars or planes. These were different. Arranged in a precise triangle, they hung motionless at first. My initial thought was drones, but their movement was nothing like any drone I'd seen. They drifted together, smooth and unified, as if connected by an invisible framework. Then the formation began to rotate, slow, steady, impossibly uniform, like the sky was turning around these fixed points. Jasper stopped dead, completely frozen. No barking, no growling, just rigid, with his head tilted slightly upward, watching. I tugged his leash, but he wouldn't budge. The lights continued their measured rotation, perhaps a quarter turn every few seconds. I tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Helicopters, no sound. Balloons, impossible. They maintained such a perfect shape, and there wasn't enough wind to move them so evenly. After what seemed like a minute, the triangular formation drifted toward the trees at the park's edge, still rotating. Even now, I can't explain what I saw. Planes don't move like that. Drones don't either. And that strange silent movement haunts me, especially on quiet nights when I find myself listening intently, wondering. Lights were moving incredibly fast, but their motion was weirdly hypnotic. Not just the lights themselves, but something about the space around them. seemed to bend and warp. My neck started aching from staring, so I crouched down to check on Jasper, hoping to encourage him forward. But he wouldn't even look at me. His entire body was rigid, ears pulled back in a way I'd never seen before. Gradually, the lights slowed their rotation until they returned to their original position. Then they simply stopped. For about 5 seconds, they hung completely motionless. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. Suddenly, one by one, they vanished. Not fading, not dimming, just gone. The moment the last light disappeared, Jasper relaxed. He didn't run, just started walking again, as if nothing unusual had happened. All at once, neighborhood sounds returned, distant car engines, a dog barking somewhere, the soft buzz of streetlights. We made our way home in silence, and I kept glancing upward, half expecting the lights to reappear, but the sky remained empty. Back in my apartment, I tried to rationalize what we'd seen. I scoured local forums and weather reports, searching for any explanation, an air show, a scheduled event, anything. But I found nothing. I hadn't even thought to take a photo. My phone had remained untouched in my pocket throughout the entire experience. What troubled me most was Jasper's reaction. Normally, he's curious and fearless, even in strange situations. That night, he avoided the spot where we first stopped. For days afterward, whenever we passed the park, he'd slow down and give the area a wide berth, as if something invisible and threatening lingered there. About a week later, he returned to his usual self. But I haven't walked through that park at night since. It was well past midnight when a faint, irregular crunching sound jolted me awake. The noise resembled someone walking on loose gravel, carrying in that peculiar muffled way sounds travel in the woods, making it impossible to determine if the source was 10 or 50 feet away. I lay still, trying to convince myself it was just an animal, maybe a raccoon or a deer passing through, but something felt off. The steps were too steady, too measured and deliberate. No pauses, no natural wandering or sniffing. No sound, just a rhythmic crunch like boots on a surface that shouldn't exist. I was camped in a small clearing, maybe a quarter mile from the main trail, with nothing but a ring of pale stones marking my spot. The night was still, and my eyes adjusted to catch the faint silver moonlight filtering through the branches. The crunching drew closer, and I knew whatever was making the sound had reached the clearing's edge. That's when I saw it. Something decidedly not human. A weak white glow moved unlike anything I'd seen before, sliding along the tree line. It wasn't shining on the trees, but moving within them, a soft light that seemed to have a mind of its own. No footsteps, no breaking twigs, just a steady, shifting illumination. My mouth went dry as I watched it drift, circling the clearing about 30 feet away. This wasn't a swinging lantern or a swaying flashlight beam. Instead, it floated sideways, low to the ground, as if following an invisible track. Instinctively, my hand found the tent zipper. If someone was playing around, I needed to see more, or possibly scare them off. I eased the zipper down, wincing at the metallic sound that seemed thunderous in the silent night. But when I finally opened the flap enough to peek out, the glow had vanished. Complete silence surrounded me. No movement, just the dark trees and cold air. I scanned the tree line, noticing an unsettling absence of sound. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just dead quiet. I closed the tent flap and listened, expecting more crunching or movement from another direction. Nothing came. Half an hour passed before I finally grabbed my flashlight. Its beam cut across the clearing, illuminating everything exactly as I had left it. Pale stones, fire pit, low grass. I swept the light toward the trees where the glow had been, finding only trunks and shadows. Walking to the edge, I searched the ground. No footprints. No trace. I stopped cold when I realized my backpack was no longer where I'd left it under the tent's vestibule. Instead, it sat upright in the middle of the clearing, untouched. The surrounding gravel ring remained undisturbed, the grass around it seemingly untrampled. Walking over, I checked the pack carefully. The straps were still buckled, zippers closed. Opening the main compartment revealed everything exactly as I'd packed it. Food, clothes, phone, just move. Sleep became impossible after that. I sat in the tent, flashlight resting in my lap, waiting for dawn. When morning came, the clearing looked completely normal. No footprints marred the dirt. The gravel ring remained untouched. My backpack sat precisely where I'd found it earlier. I packed up quickly and left, cutting the trip short without looking back as I reached the trail. The drive home was through Green Hollow, a town so small it barely registered on most maps. Past midnight, the roads stretched endlessly, narrow asphalt cutting through thick tree lines. occasional fields breaking the darkness, County Road 6 wound on, an AM radio station crackling intermittently. A yellowish light caught my eye ahead on the right. At first, I mistook it for a street lamp, but there were no poles, no houses nearby. Something about the light seemed off. I slowed, pulling onto the gravel shoulder. 200 yards off the road, the light hung motionless. Too high for a tractor, too low to be a star. I killed the engine, rolling down the window. Only crickets and grass rustling broke the silence. Then it moved. Not up, not down, but a smooth, impossibly level glide, as if someone had shifted the entire scene along an invisible track. No bounce, no tilt. The movement was unnervingly steady, defying gravity in a way that made my skin crawl. Not because it was dramatic, but because it felt fundamentally wrong. The drive had been uneventful until I noticed a strange light on the side of the field. It remained constant, a warm glow that didn't flicker or change, sliding behind the hill and vanishing completely. I waited, expecting it to reappear, but it never did. My car sat motionless, headlights off, as I tried to make sense of what I'd witnessed. In the darkness, my eyes seemed to play tricks. Faint movements flickered at the edge of my perception, but nothing substantial materialized. When I finally started the car, another detail struck me. There were no utility poles or wires anywhere near this field. The road stretched empty in both directions, with no signs of electrical infrastructure. As I pulled back onto the road, the radio erupted into static. Spinning the dial, I found only dead air and faint hisses. The AM station I'd been listening to earlier had disappeared entirely. About 5 minutes later, another light appeared, this time lower to the ground. I initially thought it might be an approaching vehicle, but it resolved into a distant farmhouse porch light, steady and fixed. Surprisingly, I felt relieved, which seemed absurd, yet it made the previous mysterious light feel even more bizarre. The rest of the journey passed quietly, but when I reached home and glanced at the car's clock, something felt off. The trip typically took around 30 minutes. I'd left my friend's place near 12:45, and even accounting for a brief stop, I should have arrived around 1:15. Instead, the clock read 1:42. I tried rationalizing the time discrepancy. Maybe I'd sat in the car longer than remembered, perhaps 20 minutes instead of 5. But something didn't feel right. I wasn't tired enough to lose track of time so dramatically. Inside, I made tea and checked the kitchen radio. It worked perfectly, with clear stations and late-night chatter. I almost called someone to describe what I'd seen, but stopped myself. The floating street lamp sliding sideways into a hill, it sounded like pure imagination. The next day, I drove back in daylight. The field appeared completely ordinary. Patchy grass, no structures, no tire tracks. The hill was just a gentle rise, maybe 10 feet high, with nothing behind it except sloping land leading towards distant woods. No trace remained of whatever had created that strange, sliding light. Here's a rewritten version of the text. The house was silent that night. No radio, no mechanical sounds, just an unusual light seeping through the curtains. My name's Aaron, and I live in a narrow house on the edge of town where a small river winds past and scrubland stretches out behind me. At 2:17 a.m., something woke me. A pale, steady glow moved across the wall like someone had pressed a flashlight against the fabric. Everything around me looked normal. Shoes by the door, coffee tin in the kitchen, fan humming on timer. This wasn't a dream. I pulled on pants and a sweatshirt, then stepped outside. The air carried the scent of impending rain, though forecasts promised clear skies. Cool grass pressed against my bare feet. Ahead of me, beyond the tree line by the river, a light filled the entire yard and sky, blocking out stars. This wasn't any ordinary light. It was an unnatural white, not warm, not cold like a camera flash dimmed to a slow throb. No sound accompanied it. No mechanical hum, no distant motor. The air remained unchanged, trees unmoved. Then something strange happened. An animal, maybe an owl or raccoon, called out from the riverbank and was suddenly silenced, as if the world had been muted. I watched the light pulse 3 times. Rational explanations raced through my mind. A construction floodlight, a generator on the far bank, a police helicopter. None fit. The neighboring houses stood dark, their windows blank. No searchlights, no reflective surfaces in the trees. The light felt uncomfortably close, not distant, but not immediate either, just present. And in moments like these, small details start to accumulate, making everything feel slightly off-kilter. Something was off that night. The motion sensor on the garage hadn't triggered in days, and my truck's clock was slightly out of sync. Small details that seemed unconnected at first. Earlier in the week, the neighborhood Facebook group had shared a post about a strange humming sound from the south side. Standing there in the backyard, I suddenly realized these little electrical oddities had been happening for days, and I'd never pieced them together. I wanted to call someone, but caught myself. My voice sounded thin and strange in the night. Who calls about a weird light in the backyard? The rational part of me wanted to go inside, lock the door, and wait for morning. But another part was drawn to investigate. 3 steps into the damp grass, and everything felt different. The yard seemed to expand, its edges deeper and more mysterious. The light pulsed and shifted, not dimming but narrowing at its center. I kept walking, almost against my will. Then something stopped me. A subtle change in how sound traveled, perhaps. In that moment of stillness, the light blinked twice faster than before and vanished. Not faded, not descended, just gone. Instantly, like a thumb covering a flashlight. Stars reappeared where the light had been. Trees returned to their dark silhouettes. Suburban night reasserted itself. The hallway fan, distant heating sounds, the gradual return of animal noises. My neighbor's dog began barking at something on the street. I stood there, staring at the spot where the light had been. My phone read 2:24 a.m. 7 minutes. Gone. This wasn't a small thing. When you're certain you've been awake, losing minutes feels like falling. I checked the time again. Still 2:24. The porch camera, an old doorbell system I'd installed after package thefts, was dark. Its LED completely unlit. Something had happened. I just didn't know what. I had been transferring footage from my camera to my laptop and deleting the card when I noticed something strange. The camera seemed to have power. The ring blinked when I opened the app, but the recorded clip was corrupted. Only a 1-second file appeared, opening to a single white frame before going blank. Every other clip played normally. I walked the yard meticulously, checking the fence line, riverbank path, and tree trunks. The grass where I had stepped felt ordinary. No scorch marks, no footprints, no ozone smell. The air tasted like plain yard air, but my hands were shaking in a way unrelated to cold. Back inside, I closed and locked the door, sitting at the kitchen table with lights off and blinds cracked open, watching the backyard until my eyes nearly crossed. Nothing returned. Around 3:10 a.m., I finally went to bed, but sleep was restless. Every creak seemed to carry a pressure, as if someone might be moving just outside my field of vision. Morning brought conversation with my neighbor Casey while watering the lawn. He laughed initially, but frowned when I described the doorbell cam's peculiarities. My dad mentioned seeing a bright object over the river from his porch, initially thinking it was a drone. When I asked about sounds at 2 a.m., he rubbed his eyebrow, recalling a muffled something before falling back asleep. His security footage showed a 2-minute recording gap around 2:17. By noon, 3 unexplained pieces of evidence emerged. My door camera's corrupted file, Casey's system's blank nighttime spot, and 7 missing minutes from my phone's clock. None definitively proved anything, just suggested something odd had occurred. I continued my day, normally work emails, dry cleaning pickup, dinner with a friend discussing politics. Yet when quiet, the yard seemed to pull at me. I kept visualizing how the light had narrowed before extinguishing, as if someone had focused and then switched it off. At dusk, I returned to the riverbank, surveying the backyards in one continuous view. No burned patches marked the far bank. I woke up because the curtains were too bright. Not a slow, leaking glow from a street lamp, but a steady, pale light that washed the whole bedroom like someone had hung a sheet and shone a flashlight straight at it. My name is Ben. I live in a small split level at the end of a cul-de-sac, yard away from the marsh that runs along the edge of town. We get quiet nights out there, the kind where you can hear frogs and the occasional truck down on the highway. I checked my phone out of habit. 2:11 a.m. For a second, I pinned all the normal explanations to the back of my head. A car with high beams, a neighbor leaving the porch light on, a late-night delivery truck. None of them fit the way the light pressed itself into the room, filling the corners without throwing hard shadows. The kitchen clock on the counter had stopped at 1:47 earlier that day, and I hadn't thought to change the battery. My old radio, the one I keep tuned to a talk station for background noise, had been acting weird all week, static whenever the show got serious, then snapping back. Little things, ordinary, and I hadn't connected any of them until the light was on the curtains. I pulled on sweatpants and a t-shirt and padded to the back door barefoot. The air outside smelled like the marsh after rain, wet and green. Even though the forecast was for clear skies, the light was directly over the high cedar at the far edge of the yard. It made the trees look like paper cutouts. It was close enough that the stars in that quarter of the sky didn't show at all. The light flattened them like someone had erased a patch of the night. It made no sound, no hum, no motor, no prop. Water flowed the same. Fireflies drifted like tiny unrelated stars. I don't have an explanation. I don't have an authority to which I can point and say they'll tell you, because no one has told me anything. I've got cameras, I've got a neighbor's testimony, and I've got a tight little pocket of lost time stitched into the night that I walk around like a foreign object in my pocket. If I tell people, they ask if I'm okay and offer a cup of coffee, and then the conversation moves on. They want me to be physical again, to laugh about it with them. Sometimes I do. Other times I stand at the back door and watch the sky, because if something comes back, I want to see how ordinary the world looks when it arrives. The chirp of the low-battery smoke detector barely registered as I stood on the concrete step, gripping the door frame. Mrs. Lopez's dog barked once, then stopped abruptly. I couldn't decide what to do, only that going outside seemed the least ridiculous option. Dew-slick grass chilled my bare feet as I walked toward a pulsing light. Not a harsh strobe, but a rhythmic glow like a phone screen at the edge of perception. My old analog watch hesitated for a moment, ticking slightly off beat. The light's mechanical precision struck me as both exact and absurd. A cedar's shadow crossed my boots. The light narrowed briefly, as if focused through an invisible lens, then expanded again. With each step, the pulse quickened subtly, then suddenly gone. No gradual fade, just instant darkness studded with stars. Ordinary sounds returned, a distant highway hum, an owl's soft call, a neighbor's screen door creaking. My watch read 217. My kitchen counterphone would later show 219. Something about time felt slightly askew. A minute somehow shifted without my noticing. Back inside the kitchen's bright light, I peeled an orange in one long strip, listening. The living room radio was dead, nothing but plain black static across all stations. The doorbell camera app showed only moonlight on the sidewalk and marsh path, silent and unchanged. The night started ordinary enough until I found something strange in the recordings. A single white frame at 210 sandwiched between normal footage from 1 to 209 and resuming again at 220. I stared at that blank frame until my eyes felt like they were burning. A washed-out image with no shape or detail, as if something had blinded the sensor. I called my brother, because that's what you do when faced with a small impossibility that unnerves you. He answered sleepy and grumpy, and laughed when I first described what I'd seen. Probably a police helicopter, he said dismissively, but his tone changed when I described the pulsing light and how it vanished when I stepped into the yard. His wife chimed in from the speaker, asking about house cameras and whether everything was locked. The thing felt different depending on how it was being discussed. Smaller when dismissed, larger when taken seriously. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched in that space where the light had been. The hair on my neck prickled through the rest of the night. I checked windows 3 times, secured doors, and slept in fits. The house seemed to amplify every sound. Pipes, furnace, wind, all seemed to be rehearsing some unknown performance. At dawn, I walked the yard with the flashlight, finding no trace, no scorch marks, no metallic scent, no evidence on the firm ground. Mrs. Evidence on the firm ground. Lopez mentioned hearing a strange whistle around 2, assuming it was a train. The couple walking their terrier spoke of a bright flash over the cedar during the meteor shower. Each story felt like a puzzle piece, plausible individually but not quite fitting together. The cancelled recording, the dead radio, the sudden silence of every creature nearby. These details refused to align with any simple explanation. I tried to continue my day normally, handling work emails and a long post-home dentist appointment, but the unexplained lingered just beyond understanding. The night seemed to hover, waiting to collapse back onto me. Until dusk, I steered clear of the backyard, as if there were unspoken rules about approaching a place where something peculiar had occurred. Tom from the hardware store, a man who prides himself on being unflappable, stopped by and gave me a supportive shoulder pat. "Don't let it get to you," he said. Those default words people offer when they're truly at a loss. As the sky deepened and creek frogs resumed their nightly chorus, I stood by the kitchen window, staring at the cedar. The stars looked perfectly ordinary, pinpoint sharp. I reassured myself that perception varies wildly. How a dozen people might witness something and interpret it completely differently, or perhaps not notice anything at all. My mind drifted to the white frame on the camera, to how time had seemed to compress strangely. I recalled how the light vanished the moment I stepped into its space, as if I'd breached an invisible boundary I wasn't meant to cross. That night, I slept in my own bed with curtains drawn tight. The house felt normal. Familiar sounds of pipes, a fan, the refrigerator's steady hum. Yet everything carried a faint scent reminiscent of marshland after rainfall. Around 1 a.m., curtain movement startled me until I realized it was just the cat perched on the windowsill, watching something outside. I left the curtain undisturbed and listened. The night continued, simultaneously mundane and mysterious. I possess no definitive explanation, no trusted photograph, no authoritative witness to validate my experience. What remains is an image, a pale, steady light with its slow pulse, the blank white file on my camera, and an unsettling sense that some quiet encounters simply dissolve upon being approached. Life continues. Life continues. I sleep. I work. I make coffee. Occasionally, my thoughts prod at the memory of that light, seeking comprehension, but it remains elusive, sliding away just as I nearly grasp its edges. On a routine night flight to Farmington, conditions were unremarkable. Clear sky, a slender moon hanging overhead, the kind of night that reminds you how insignificant everything can seem. I was set for 55500, autopilot engaged. A half-empty thermos sat chilled in the console. Radios mumbled softly, occasional flight following handoffs and a distant cargo truck's transmission floating from what sounded like 3 counties away. This was a leg I'd flown countless times before. I noticed something in the landing light's cone that at first looked like a star, but it wasn't. It was too close, positioned about 5 or 6 miles left of the wingtip, seeming to be at our exact altitude. No blinking lights. No navigation or strobe markers, just a dark, hard-edged shape that seemed to absorb starlight. Initially, I thought it might be unexpected traffic, perhaps an unlit crop duster or banner tow. I checked the transponder, switched to ident, and listened for traffic warnings. Nothing appeared. The electronic flight instruments showed a blank, where other aircraft should display, and my transponder was transmitting normally. Yet this object held its position relative to us, as if it belonged in our airspace. I radioed the center, Cessna 7KQH, visual traffic, left 2 o'clock, same altitude. Say intentions. The response was clear and practiced. 7KH center. Roger. We show no primary or secondary target in your area. Maintain present heading and altitude. I confirmed the instruction and rechecked our heading and GPS track. When I looked out the window again, the object had matched our ground track and speed, not perfectly aligned like 2 planes flying side by side, but pacing us as if attached to our velocity vector. I disengaged the autopilot and banked left 3 degrees for a better view. Then the object did something indescribable. It didn't turn or bank, but rolled as if gravity had loosened its grip. It moved laterally opposite my bank with an almost fluid motion, like a model sliding through water. No acceleration, no exhaust, no wake. It simply moved. We were like synchronized dancers, with this object effortlessly adjusting our shared choreography. I called center again, my voice calmer than I felt. Center 7, KH. Right now, the traffic's holding exactly parallel. It's rolling on. Static filled the headset for a moment. The radio crackled with the controller's response, a tone that now signaled they were scanning for primary returns. Negative. 7KQH, no targets. Are you receiving any interference? My headset carried a small, precise noise that hinted something was amiss, like a squelch being coaxed. I methodically checked frequencies, systems, and settings. The ground radio, the standby, the audio panel all behaved normally. All behaved normally. PTO heat on, vacuum steady, alternator green. The panel clock blinked and resumed. There was a list of ordinary things doing ordinary things, and the extraordinary thing outside doing nothing that fit perfectly. Under the glare shield, I grabbed the binoculars, cold and damp, as if they'd been somewhere colder before. Lifting them, I caught the shape, vague, geometric, unlike the rounded belly of most aircraft. Matte edges rejected the landing light completely. The silhouette remained crisp. No windows, no tails, no prop blur. At these scales, something should have flickered or shimmered. Instead, nothing. It simply existed, matching our movement precisely. When I shifted for a head-on view, it responded differently. I banked right, nudging throttles to maintain steady airspeed. The object didn't chase in a straight line. Instead, it slid away as if tethered to an invisible string, suddenly released. The roll completed like a lazy turn, then drifted sideways along the horizon. No noise, no thermal wake. like smoke dispersing in reverse. I radioed approach on the guard channel, providing my tail number and describing the traffic at 1 o'clock, matching altitude and gliding parallel. Approach 7KQH. Can you verify any aircraft in Ome sector? Their response came quickly. 7KQH negative. No primary targets in that sector. We're tracking your transponder and known traffic, but nothing else. The critical question remained, could they physically see anything on radar corresponding to what I was witnessing? The cockpit went quiet after the controllers. We would. I had nothing but our position and distance to go by. Pilots often misjudge things at night, and we were about 2 to 3 miles out at the same altitude. For 2 minutes, I watched something transform from a curious puzzle into complete absence. The object's silhouette narrowed and brightened, almost like a lens bending light. I half expected it to ignite, strobe, or show some exhaust trail. Instead, it simply tightened into a point and vanished. No phase change, no spray, nothing I could point to as a mechanism. One moment an indigo cut marked the lower sky. The next, it was gone. No transit across the stars, no streak, just emptiness, like someone had lifted a birdcage. Suddenly, small things in the cockpit felt larger. My cheap pilot's watch jumped 5 minutes and then corrected itself. The thermos slid across the console inexplicably. When I returned to neutral trim, my phone revealed something strange. The recording I'd started had one file corrupted into an unopenable blob. The second file showed only 3 frames of a dark smear, followed by blackness my phone labeled as unsupported. I told the controller about the recording and they marked it for the engineers, but they didn't ask to see the file. Instead, they wondered if I wanted to divert. I did not. Nothing made sense about diverting. We continued to Farmington like a ship passing through insignificant fog. My hands hovered above the yoke, as if not touching it might offer some protection. The wind held steady, the runway appeared, and the landing was exactly what our instruments prepare us for. On the ground, I taxied slowly, leaving the lights on because the cabin still carried an odd electric coolness I couldn't explain. At the FBO, I completed the paperwork and tried to get someone to examine the files. Maintenance checked my transponder traces, ATC printout, and GPS log. They found nothing unusual except a tiny GPS track anomaly showing a half-second ground speed blip. The controllers sent over the radar tape. It was clean where we'd been. This sort of thing happens sometimes at night, one of them said, as if that explained everything. I didn't expect an answer. I didn't think there'd be a report. I was standing by the grill, thumb resting on a beer, when the evening settled into that hushed calm after the sprinklers wind down and the kids head inside. The backyard was quiet, almost too quiet. A bright point hovered just above the neighbor's garage roof, low and strange. At first I thought it was a plane. Light trails are common here, but something was off about its movement. It descended differently, like someone gently guiding a paper lantern down by hand. Then it stopped, hanging steadily just above the western horizon, too bright and sharp. Not like a flare or street light, but with that hard, focused quality stars have. The maple cast an odd, small shadow on the lawn. A shadow that shouldn't have been visible in the half-light, as if the geometry itself was wrong. I realized I'd stopped breathing before I could process what was happening. Little oddities started to accumulate. The porch light flickered twice on its own, as if someone was testing the switch. Gus, our dog, who normally charges through thunderstorms without hesitation, sat motionless on the back step, head tilted like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. The crickets had gone silent. The entire neighborhood seemed to lean in, suspended in an unnatural stillness. A snippet of TV dialogue drifted through an open window, a jarring human sound in the absolute quiet. I considered calling Lena from the kitchen, where she was finishing the dishes, but something held me back. Later, back at work, I filed the routine incident notes, careful not to alarm my wife with the full story. The empty patch of sky kept replaying in my mind. When I describe it, people want to categorize it. Weather balloon, experimental drone, optical illusion, none of those explanations fit what I experienced. Now I check everything twice. The transponder, the squitter, the frequency, wing flex, even the thermos under the glare shield. I still fly night routes, particularly to Farmington, and when something dark sits where a star used to be, I report it sooner. The controller always says nothing is showing, but I know what I saw. We were standing by the back door when it happened. My digital watch was acting strange, jumping between times like it couldn't decide where it wanted to be. 9:07, then 9:21, then back to 9:08. Lena was beside me in her slippers, and we watched this strange light hanging motionless in the sky. I tried to capture it on my phone, but technology seemed to rebel. The face unlock stuttered, the screen stayed black an instant too long. When the camera finally opened, the image was grainy and distorted. The tree lines looked smudged, and the bright point was just an overexposed smear that bore no resemblance to what we were seeing. I switched to video, feeling the phone warm unnaturally in my hand. I recorded for 20 seconds, but when I played it back, the file dragged and stuttered. The final frame went completely black. The audio was clear. You could hear Lena's socks on the wooden porch, the neighbor's refrigerator humming, but the light itself was a blank white void. Then it moved, not down, not away, but straight up, like someone had pulled a slingshot. The acceleration made your stomach drop. In a single blink, it went from below the roofline to impossibly high. For a moment, it looked like a child's drawing of a comet, a hard head with a suggestion of a tail. Then the tail vanished, leaving just a sharp pin of light racing into the darkness. It happened so fast that Lena and I blurted out nonsensical things. "Did you see?" The neighbor's curtains shuffled as people leaned out of where Gus shot up, startled, then stood staring at the empty sky as if expecting the light to reappear. The maple's shadow returned to normal, just the soft, broad shadow cast by moonlight. The backyard felt strange after the light vanished. Jonah from next door poked his head over the fence, looking sheepish. "I thought it was an airplane or a drone or maybe a light on a fishing pole," he said, trailing off. Nobody had a good explanation. We walked the perimeter, phone lights cutting through the darkness, calling out to Mira. She was already inside, more concerned about the time than what we'd just seen. A cat perched on the windowsill, eyes gleaming like coins, then slipped through the cat door. The rational explanation started crumbling. No drones had been flying over the neighborhood at 9:30 on a Tuesday. No emergency calls had come through on the scanner. The airport was in the wrong direction, and satellites don't dive toward the horizon and shoot straight up. Yet something had moved with impossible precision where no known object should exist. Earlier, the sprinkler by the back fence, which I'd shut off at 8, had been cycling when we returned just minutes later. Its timer was set to off. Where the light had hung, a patch of lawn felt unnaturally cold under my bare foot, like stepping on stone chilled by ice. I knelt and ran my fingers through the grass. No scorch marks, no singed stems, just damp, cool soil, and the mechanical smell of the drill. Lena suggested it might have been a meteor. I mentioned a comet had been visible last month. That's what our brains do, trying to match patterns. I kept thinking about the impossible shadow the light had cast on the maple tree, and how calm everything else remained. The sky returned to normal. Stars sat in their expected places. A thin haze stretched over the western trees. The moon hung like a dry coin. When we went inside, Gus followed but stopped at the kitchen door, refusing to come any further. Something had shifted, and we all felt it. He blinked slowly, ears tilted forward, watching the window like someone emerging from a dream. I secured the back door, feeling that this simple act might anchor the night in place. Lena methodically rinsed dishes, her movements deliberate, as if arranging the world back into order. My phone grew warm as I replayed the 10-second video, watching the battery drain from 90% to 80%. The file stuttered, skipping its brightest moment before freezing. Suddenly, a blue screen flickered, revealing an unfamiliar face. My thumb hovered over the delete key, then relaxed. I couldn't tell Lena anything more meaningful than "it moved wrong," which was, in truth, the most honest description. Later, I fell asleep with the window slightly open, letting night sounds drift in. A distant highway hummed, a dog barked 2 streets away, and a passing car turned its headlights away from our house. In the darkness, a memory of a sharp light descending low and then yanked upward felt like an unexpected note in an otherwise ordinary melody. This didn't make me fear for the house's safety. Instead, it made me feel small and observed, like that uncomfortable moment when a stranger in a grocery store sees something in you that you didn't intend to reveal. Morning arrived without evidence. The maple stood unchanged. Jonah hammered in his garage with typical rhythm, and the sprinkler timer ran its usual course. Gus wanted breakfast and ignored the window. I shared no details that might hint at anything supernatural, sticking instead to concrete facts. The time, the camera's failure, the cold patch of grass. Lena whispered. Maybe it was nothing. Her words carried a desperate hope, yet a part of her remained vigilant. At twilight, she'd catch herself scanning the western sky, watching for that precise, star-like point to descend and then vanish upward, as if pulled by an invisible string. I drove into the mist without much contemplation. From 100 yards away, it hung low over the fields, resembling a cotton sheet draped across the landscape. Unlike typical highway fog that obscures and blinds, this mist glowed from within, a pale, even light that transformed the wet guardrail into a moonlit strip. The moment my car entered its embrace, the radio dissolved into static. The highway stretched out before me, empty and still. Late night had crept in while I lingered at the shop, meticulously organizing cabinets and convincing myself I'd make it home for Sunday breakfast. A soft blue diner sign and an idling truck marked the distant exit. Nothing else moved. Mist hung low like a compressed world tucked into a shoebox, shrinking everything around me. At first I thought the radio had simply lost reception, common enough in an old car sliding between cellular towers, but the static remained constant, unchanged by my dial turning. Something felt off. Highway mile markers seemed to skip unnaturally. 34, then 38, then 43. The digital clock flickered strangely, repeating 207 moments apart. A pickup truck ahead faded from view, its tail lights vanishing as abruptly as switched-off Christmas lights. An underlying hum, mechanical or atmospheric, thrummed beneath the radio's white noise. My ears popped. The mist carried an odd metallic scent, reminiscent of post-rain puddles, though no rain had fallen. It drifted through the car's interior, leaving the upholstery oddly sterile. Where painted road lines met the fog, colors bled and melted, blurring boundaries between solid and ethereal. Strangely, I wasn't afraid. Instead, a peculiar animal calm settled over me. The fog's softness made turning back feel fundamentally wrong. I drove slower, one hand on the wheel, the other resting where morning coffee's heat had lingered, watching the transformed landscape drift by. Miles of empty road stretched out before me, just the diner sign and a lone farm lamp breaking the darkness. My focus narrowed to the essentials. Keep steering, keep the wheels straight, control the speed. Suddenly, the radio crackled back to life with a country station and a weather report. The abrupt shift making my skin crawl. My cheap high school watch read 2:14, but something felt off. When I checked the car clock, it showed 21:42, a discrepancy that sent a chill down my spine. 7 minutes had vanished without a trace. No memory of braking, no recollection of turning, nothing to explain the missing time. I'd noticed strange things before. The porch light that wouldn't burn out, a store sign stuck on the same text for hours. But this felt different. My hands were sticky inside my gloves, the air tasting clean and ordinary. A metallic hint lingered on my tongue, mixed with stale coffee. My phone showed no missed calls or notifications. The GPS route confirmed I'd stayed on the straight path home. Driving with the windows cracked, cold air cutting through the silence, I tried to make sense of what had happened. At the stoplight near my street, a kid on a bike rode past, singing with headphones on. When his watch matched mine, the weight of the time drift hit me fully. Did I hit something? The urge to ask everyone around me bubbled up, but I suppressed it. I pulled into my driveway, mechanically going through the motions, turning the key, pulling the handbrake, opening the door. These familiar actions felt like my only anchor to reality, a lifeline in a moment of inexplicable uncertainty. I stood in the doorway of the house, letting the cold seep into my skin until my nose felt numb. The early sun hung pale and uninterested over the trees, casting the frost on the lawn in a watered glass shimmer. I'd done my ritual to reset whatever had loosened, checking the car meticulously. Oil level, perfect. Tires? Hard. No new scratches marred the bumper. My coffee cup remained upright in its holder. The floor mat on the driver's side held a few dark specks I couldn't identify. They might have been there before. The radio sat tuned to its last station, waiting. I meant to tell someone about what happened, call the shop, text my sister, but stopped short. What would I say? 7 missing minutes and a low inner glow weren't exactly compelling conversation. Making coffee slowly, I listened to the kettle sing its familiar note. Those 7 minutes hung in my memory like a blank strip torn from an old film reel. I could trace the edges, the mist, the static, a lingering smell, but nothing would connect in the center. It was as if someone had spliced out a moment and expected no one to notice. In the days since, I'd driven that stretch of road repeatedly, scanning for something, anything, out of place. People do this after strange experiences. They seek wear and tear, hunt for proof. The farm lights remained unchanged. The diner looked exactly the same. A yellowed menu, a man sweeping the sidewalk. Mile markers stood precisely where they'd always been. My watch glass bore a few scratches from last month's toolbox trip. The radio worked normally across its usual frequencies. Static appeared only in areas with poor reception, but sometimes Driving home at night, I'd catch a glimpse of my neighbor's field, a patch seemingly lit from below, reminiscent of that soft, impossible glow. I'd blink, and it would return to ordinary lawn and fence. Some nights I'd rationalize. Maybe I dozed. Perhaps a backup truck's headlights played tricks in the mirror. Other nights, there was just the memory, the hiss, the hum, the absolute quiet beneath that strange ceiling, and the unsettling knowledge that when I looked down, my clock showed the same minute twice. I don't have a story with an ending. I have only the experience itself. The night was silent, but the ridge held something strange. My coffee had gone cold back at home, the 7 missing minutes echoing in my mind like a forgotten breath. The lights appeared first, threading through pine fir ahead of the switchback. They moved in a delicate dance, pale pinpricks weaving between tree trunks without a sound, almost like tiny lanterns suspended on an invisible string. They dipped and rose, following an unseen trail's rhythm. At first, I thought of careless hikers with their LED markers. Then reality crashed in. I was alone. My headlamp hung unused around my neck, the moon bright enough to cast shadows. The red LED on my pack blinked softly. Damp earth and pine pitch filled my lungs, my breath forming thin fog in the cold. I froze, that instinctive stillness you feel when wildlife suddenly appears. These lights move differently, not like human steps, but with an eerie intelligence. 3 clustered together, then a solitary light pausing, then 4 spinning like a disjointed thought. They glowed with a soft warmth, reminiscent of candlelight through frosted glass, utterly unlike harsh electronic lights. Strangely, they didn't reflect on wet needles or bark. Sometimes a light would vanish behind a trunk, then reappear slightly shifted, as if it had somehow passed through solid wood. I tried rationalizing. Swamp gas, will-o-wisps, those explanations that sound ridiculous until witnessed. Earlier, Maya and Tom had been hiking ahead, moving faster. They'd split off at the rocky trail section near the creek. My troublesome knee had slowed me down, protesting the steeper slopes. We'd planned to regroup at the switchback, maybe share a quick meal. When I finally emerged from the trees onto the trail's small bench, the lights were waiting. A sinuous line of alien suns, impossibly present. I started walking. The night was thin and close, stripped of its usual sounds. Every bird hush, every cricket silence I knew from hawk passages had vanished before those lights appeared. My heartbeat climbed to my throat, an odd sensation of feeling your own blood loud and private. Something watched me, but not like a person's gaze. This feeling was wider, the way a room knows you're simply present. I crept forward, my headlamp a heavy weight against my chest, unused. Curiosity pulled me despite common sense screaming to retreat. Soft sounds marked my approach, a click of buckles, a scratch of cloth, swallowed by darkness. Each time I thought I'd close the distance, the lights would turn and slide just out of reach, seeming both curious and cautious. With maybe 50 yards between us, a breeze shifted the pines on the left, a branch cracked below, a small sound that explained nothing. I realized Maya's laugh was absent from the wind. Tom's footsteps were silent. The dark had transformed from full and healthy to something compressed and alien. I told myself to call out to switch on my light, but sound felt final, so I kept quiet and watched as the lights reacted like living creatures. They darted with a collective twitch, rising not as light attached to something, but as independent points choosing their path through air. They scattered between tree crowns like a flock of sparrows, stacking and twisting. Then, sudden and silent as paper on a breeze, they stopped. Suspended maybe 50 feet above the trail, they hung motionless. Some clustered tightly like a child holding starry bunches. Others spread out like musical notes. They didn't flicker or sink. Moonlight washed through them, turning pine bark silver. Their glow was steady and honeyed, neither burning nor reflecting. My lungs stung from holding breath. A white fog rolled out as I reflexively reached for my phone. Cold against my hand, the screen showed 11:42 with no notifications. Just another moment of inexplicable stillness. The woods felt wrong before anything actually happened. My compass app started spinning lazily, pointing north in a direction that didn't make sense. The watch, second hand, quivered, and each small detail seemed to stretch into something larger. When the lights began going out, it wasn't sudden. They winked off one by one, like someone casually twisting bulbs, almost rhythmic in their descent. The darkness spread with an eerie casualness, reminiscent of blinking eyelids. Each light's extinction deepened the mid-air silence. The sky remained ordinary. moon and stars unchanged, which made the dangling things between branches feel even more unnatural. They blinked out progressively until only moonlight and silence remained. The ending was so immediate and mundane that annoyance momentarily replaced fear, a more solid emotion. I called out. A thin, weak "hey" echoed back, hanging in the stillness. My legs grew numb from standing, and though thoughts of turning on my headlamp or calling Maya and Tom crossed my mind, my hands felt heavy as lead. Whatever had been present seemed to have vanished, and I told myself this constituted some form of closure. Kicking through soft pine needles where the lights had been, I found nothing. No scorch marks, no residue, just damp leaves and a startled beetle scurrying away. The absence of evidence felt more unsettling than any potential explanation. At the creek clearing, Maya and Tom sat on an upturned log, their faces pale with concern. "We heard you call," Maya said. She explained she'd been near the water, thinking I'd turned back. Tom's pack lay open, a map peeking out. They'd seen nothing. When I described what happened, they shrugged in that reasonable way people do to maintain normalcy. Tom suggested fireflies, explanation that felt thin and unconvincing. Shared experiences make strange occurrences more digestible, but their lack of witness made the event feel isolating. We hiked back in a loose, silent line, the unexplained hanging between us like mist. The trail that night was the same trail it had always been. Roots, stones, a familiar spot where my boot once slipped, leaving a scraped palm. Ordinary, yet not. A dog barked in the distance, its sound cracking like relief as we walked. Later, in my kitchen's pale light, I scrubbed my boots and pondered the lights hanging in the trees. Fragments of explanation drifted through my mind, reflections, pranksters, some atmospheric oddity. None of them felt right. No evidence existed. No photograph captured the moment. No burned bark marked the spot. Trying to recall the lights was like searching for a face glimpsed once in a crowded street. The outline remained, but details blurred and faded with each mental revisit. I made coffee, listening to the kettle's clicking notes, waiting to see if daylight would render the memory mundane. It didn't, not exactly. The memory sat like a small stone in my shoe, not painful, just persistently present. 3 hours into an overnight lake shift, I sat with cold coffee in a thermos and a cheap headlamp clipped to my cap. The water lay flat under a clear sky, everything set to the simple rhythm of casting and retrieving. Nights like these required little thought beyond the next line cast. A heron cut through the quiet, landing on a distant piling. Its neck remained impossibly steady as it waited, silhouetted against the stars. My float bumped. I set the hook out of habit. Nothing. Small irregularities began to accumulate. My old analog watch ticked slightly offbeat before catching up. A cabin light across the inlet blinked once, then stayed dark longer than seemed natural. The marsh frogs, previously loud, now fell silent, their chorus thinning to a thread before stopping completely. The silence amplified every small sound. The oar scraping against the hull, the soft clink of my lure. Everything felt different, yet nothing had changed. The night was calm, with a clean scatter of stars reflected on the water's surface like glass. I was adjusting my fishing rod when the thermos cap stuck frustratingly tight on a brand new bottle. As I pried it open, a thin arc of steam rose and vanished. Small details began to accumulate, making me more aware of the surrounding darkness, like sensing a loose floorboard just before stepping on it. At first, I thought the odd reflection was just a trick of the ripples near my boat's bow. Then something unusual caught my eye. A patch of brightness moved on the water's surface, unlike any star or passing wake. It was a precise plane of light with a straight edge, as if a tilted sheet of metal lay flat on the water, catching starlight differently. I gripped the rod and stared. This patch defied logic. It wasn't parallel to the sky and responded to no wind. When I leaned forward, the glow slid left. When I looked right, it followed suit. Moving opposite to my head's motion sparked my first genuine sense of panic. My float bobbed in sync with my racing heartbeat. Standing up, my boots hollow against the boat's floor, I switched on my headlamp. Its soft LED cone illuminated the interior, while the world beyond remained pitch black. The reflection held its perfect rectangular shape, a looking glass that should have reflected sky and trees, but instead showed an almost white, unmarked plain. Something felt wrong. Water doesn't maintain such a clean, straight corner without something beneath it. I grabbed my cheap field binoculars and lifted them to my eyes. Through the lenses, the water's mirror remained the same bright plane. Following the plane upward, As one does when trying to understand something inexplicable, the image transformed. The brightness tilted, then fractured. Against the star field, a crisp, hard line emerged, not a vague oval or soft cloud silhouette, but a precise angle suggesting part of something much larger. It sat motionless in the sky for a brief moment, a dark wedge against the stars. No sound, no beam, no glare, just a sharp, angular presence that defied explanation. I lowered the binoculars, my eyes burning from staring at something that shouldn't exist. The wedge hung in the sky, thin as a piece of paper, pinched between two fingers, impossibly sharp. It felt wrong, like the aftermath of staring directly at the sun, where everything around the focal point warps. When I looked back, the sky had changed. The wedge smudged into nothing, like wet chalk wiped away by a finger. The stars remained fixed in their familiar positions. The frog stayed silent. The heron had vanished without a trace, as if it had never been present. Seconds stretched, filled only by the slow drip of water from my oar and the boat's gentle rattle against the dock. I tried to rationalize what I'd seen: exhaustion, optical illusion, a trick of light and reflection. Instinctively, I reached for my phone. It's what people do. Capture the moment with a digital rectangle, offloading the burden of memory. The screen lit up. Camera app ready. The battery icon glowed softly, offering a small comfort. I held the phone steady and pressed the shutter. But the image showed only stars, no trace of the strange wedge, nothing unusual. Just an ordinary night sky, as if my eyes had invented the entire experience. I tried again. The viewfinder captured only clear, reasonable space. Scrolling through the gallery, the photos appeared completely normal. For a fraction of a second, the thumbnail glitched a skipped frame that vanished as quickly as it appeared. Unsettled, I set the phone down and started the motor. The little outboard engine thudded, pulling us toward the slip. The lake remained undisturbed. No wake, no hint of disturbance. I kept the throttle low, testing whether movement might resurrect or dispel the strange vision. Nothing returned. Back on the ramp, dock boards humming beneath my boots, I tied the line and unstrapped my gear. I felt disconnected, like someone else wearing my clothes. The familiar two-lane road home wound through pine trees, a yellow strip of light creating a small tunnel. I drove slowly, headlamps illuminating the way, radio silent. My phone buzzed, a morning text from my sister, a simple question about potatoes for Sunday dinner, and the world continued unchanged. I pulled over on Old Mill Road after a double shift that had drained me, my head emptied by fluorescent lights and radio static. The stretch was isolated, with no houses, just ditches on either side and a single orange street lamp every half mile, creating pockets of soft, black darkness between them. I killed the engine but left the dash clock glowing, leaning back with my hands on the steering wheel, trying to let my thoughts settle. Something strange happened that night, something I've struggled to explain. I keep going back through the memory, searching for the moment everything shifted from ordinary to impossible. It started with small observations. The frogs sounding odd, my neighbor asking about the fish. Simple exchanges that gave me just enough space to say yes and nothing more. I didn't tell anyone about the hard corner I saw in the sky, or the bright plane that vanished between the stars. You don't start with those kinds of claims. Instead, I held on to fragments. Photos that reveal nothing, a thermos cup that stuck for a stupid moment, the memory of a shape with an impossible edge. I remember the heron's wing beat over the lake, and how the water held a patch of light like a second sky. None of it fits together neatly. At home, I left the boat keys on the counter and sat at the kitchen table, palms flat, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Sleep became difficult after that night. I'd wake at odd hours, reaching for the headlamp on the nightstand as if any light might make the edges in the dark behave themselves. Sometimes I go fishing again, returning to the place where something shifted, hoping the path might remember me. The lake remains quiet, the stars predictable, the frogs singing their usual song, but occasionally in the corner of my kitchen window, I catch a straight line against the darkness where there shouldn't be one. I look up quickly, the way you do when you hear your name called from behind. Nothing is ever there. Then the ordinary things continue. I keep the binoculars in their case now, next to an old watch, both sitting together, making sense, yet explaining nothing about the rectangle of light that didn't belong to the stars. My eyes shifted. Humidity hung thick, cut grass, and exhaust mingled in the air. Crickets chirped steadily, not loud, but constant. Minutes passed. A distant blink caught my attention. A faint headlight crawled toward the intersection 2 miles away. Just another car, expected to pass and disappear. I tracked its approach to the lamppost near the mill. Suddenly, It vanished. The light disappeared a second too quickly, like it had been switched off between poles. Something changed. The crickets seemed to fold slightly quieter. Nerves on edge. I reached for the stereo. Static hissed underneath silence. The display read 12:07. I noted the time deliberately, wanting to track how long I'd been sitting there. Tracking time helps when you're trying to convince yourself you're not losing your mind. The scene etched itself in memory. Lampposts, warm air, leather car, interior. Then the rearview mirror filled with light. Not a headlight, not a sweeping beam. The entire mirror surface flashed white, like a tiny sun had replaced my reflection. This wasn't a sharp camera flash. A flat, clean white consumed the entire rectangle, lingering for a soft, strange moment, bright enough to repaint everything in pale hues. The glove compartment, steering wheel curve, tiny gear shifter scratches, all washed in white. Looking up through the back window revealed nothing, just black road. A ditch, a patch of cattails. No vehicle lights. No people, no shade to explain the mirror's sudden illumination. I turned slowly, carefully in my seat. The angle showed the road behind and part of the embankment. Absolutely nothing. No headlights, no flash, no source for the reflective glare. The street lamp cast a narrow orange cone across the pavement. Beyond that, a black road ribbon stretched into darkness. Turning back, the mirror returned to normal, just a dark rectangle showing empty road. The dash clock now read 12:21. I froze, staring at the dash clock as it jumped from 12:07 to 12:21. 14 minutes had vanished without a trace. My brain struggled to make sense of it, my hand suspended over the stereo knob, waiting for the numbers to explain themselves. A quick glance at my phone confirmed the same oddity, 12:07. My watch read 12:08, meaning barely a minute had passed. Yet something felt profoundly wrong. The only thing that had shifted was the dash clock, inexplicably leaping forward. I stepped out of the car onto the cold-shouldered gravel. The night air bit at my throat. Walking to the trunk, I needed to confirm everything was in place. The gym bag and jumper remained untouched. No mud, no foreign prints, only my own tracks marking the ground. The road looked mundane, almost mockingly ordinary. Street lights hummed, the ditch swallowed darkness. Nothing pulsed or glowed, nothing that could explain why the mirror had momentarily seemed like a window into something else. My heart raced, that panicky feeling suggesting I might need sugar, water, or medical attention. Returning to the driver's seat, I tried to normalize the moment by starting the engine. It coughed to life on the third turn, with the mechanical hesitation typical of an aging car with a lazy battery. I drove carefully, centered in the lane, as if I were the sole traveler. Pulling onto the main road, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting that strange white patch to reappear. But the mirror showed only the familiar, boring road receding, a shrinking orange street lamp fading into darkness. The dashboard clock now ticked normally. My phone's timestamp remained steady. The radio played its mundane station, clear and uninterrupted. It felt like some invisible string had been cut. Everything returning to normal except for those 14 inexplicable minutes that existed only in the car's record. At home, I double-checked everything. The thermostat stood untouched. The front porch light flickered on as I approached, everything seeming precisely as I'd left it. Yet those missing minutes lingered, a persistent whisper of something unexplained. The clock on the dash jumped to 128, matching my phone but not making sense. My watch, an old analog piece that sometimes hangs when I forget to wind it, also showed the same time. Something felt off. Later, I called the dealership to ask about dash behavior. The young guy suggested a loose connection or software glitch from an electrical spike. I hadn't mentioned the strange light or the radio's hiss when a passing car seemed to blink out. Just get it checked, he said. My wife was folding laundry in the living room when I came in. I asked for coffee and lied about taking a longer smoke break by the car. I texted a friend a throwaway line about being exhausted. Those small confirmations you seek when the world seems strange. Sleep that night was restless. When I woke, those 14 mysterious minutes felt like stale coffee in my memory. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone, just to myself. Stories come in fragments, and sometimes those pieces refuse to connect. At the dealership, they scanned the car, checked the clock, and shrugged at a possible loose wire. They tested the alternator and ran diagnostics on the display. Only a tiny, unexplained time sync error showed up. The tech said what I dreaded: mechanical issues would be simpler. Electrical oddities are usually just bad wiring. So here I am, writing without answers. 14 minutes appeared on the dash, like someone hit fast forward and broke the film. The mirror filled with a white square that vanished like a closing shutter. The only certainty is that I'm home and the world continued spinning. The rest lives in that space where small, unaccountable things hide beneath the ordinary. My name is Tom Granger, and I live out near Lake Woodson, a small, pretty ordinary place in northern Wisconsin. Nothing fancy about it, just a bunch of trees, some cabins, and a lake that's usually calm and dark at night. Night fishing has always been my thing. There's something peaceful about being out there with just my rod and the lake under the stars. My dog Whiskey, a scruffy mutt with a lazy streak, usually tags along. He's not much of a swimmer, but loves sitting on the dock, watching the water. One Friday night in early September, everything seemed normal. The air was cool but heavy, hinting at an approaching storm. Around 9:30 p.m., we headed down to the lake. The sky was clear and star-filled, with a light wind rustling the leaves and making the water's surface shimmer softly. We set up on the far end of the dock, right over the deepest part of the lake. The water stays still there, sheltered by trees on the far shore. I cast my line and poured some coffee from my thermos. Whiskey curled up at my feet, eyes half closed. The night was quiet. Just occasional fish splashes and distant owl calls. Then something strange caught my eye. About an hour in, I noticed a faint glow near the water's surface, maybe 30 feet from the dock. It looked like a dim, diffuse light, almost like a submerged glow stick, barely visible through the darkness. I leaned forward for a better look. The light was a pale greenish-white and completely motionless. What struck me was how undisturbed the water remained. Normally, anything floating or moving would create ripples or splashes. This was different. The light seemed to hover without touching the water at all. I started keeping my phone face up on the passenger seat after that night. Sometimes at traffic lights, I catch myself checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something reappear. The numbers on the dash stay stubbornly normal. It hasn't happened again, which somehow feels worse. A faint glow caught my attention, something barely visible in the darkness. Was it bioluminescence or a shore reflection? I aimed my flashlight toward it, the beam cutting through the night, but the glow remained unchanged. No reaction, no movement. Whiskey stood alert, ears twitching, locked on the same spot. Slowly at first, just inches above the water, then faster, the light began to rise like a bubble escaping from the lake bed. But this was no ordinary bubble, smooth and round. It grew brighter with each passing second. The water beneath stayed perfectly flat, no ripples, no waves. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, half expecting the sight to vanish. Instead, it continued rising, reaching about 10 feet above the surface before drifting horizontally away from the dock and across the sky. Dropping my fishing rod, I scrambled to open my phone's camera, but as soon as I focused on the glowing orb, the screen dimmed and went completely black. Repeated attempts failed. The phone seemed to refuse acknowledging the phenomenon. Whiskey growled low, hackles raised, and a chill ran down my spine despite the mild air. The orb moved silently, smooth and steady, tracing an invisible arc across the starry sky. My heart raced as I followed its path. Then, without drama, it simply faded, like a lamp being gently switched off. The entire encounter lasted maybe 2 or 3 minutes. Afterward, the lake remained eerily calm, with no indication anything had passed through water or sky. Sitting back down, I tried processing what I'd witnessed. Whiskey stayed close, tense, his ears swiveling toward the lakeside trees. My phone remained black, and the thermos had gone cold. My hands trembled slightly. For the rest of the night, I watched the sky intently. Nothing else appeared, just the usual sounds of crickets, wind, and distant water splashes. The next morning, I shared the experience with my neighbor Greg, a fellow fisherman who knows the lake intimately. He didn't dismiss my story, simply remarking, "Sometimes the lake has its mysteries." Late afternoon, early fall. The trees were just starting to turn gold and red, the kind of colors that make you think winter's close, but not quite there yet. I was out walking my dog, a mute named Pippa, on a trail behind our house in the outskirts of Asheville. The trail is mostly quiet, except for the occasional bird or squirrel, and Pippa loves sniffing around all the fallen leaves. That day, I left my phone in my pocket to avoid distractions, hoping to clear my head after a long week at the bookstore. Pippa was restless and tugging more than usual, so I let her off leash. The trail curves through a patch of dense trees, and that's when I noticed something odd. About 50 feet ahead, above the treetops, there was this large object hovering. It wasn't making any noise. No hum, no wind, nothing. Over the next few days, I checked with local people. A woman named Elsie mentioned seeing a faint light near the lake around the same time, but she thought it was just a flashlight or kids messing around. No one else saw anything like I did. I tried to find some explanation. Biole algae doesn't happen in freshwater lakes around here. Reflection from a boat? No boats were out that night. Fishing lights? None on the lake at all. No airplanes or helicopters in the area either. What stuck with me was the water, how it never moved, even though something was clearly coming up from it and floating away. The glow was there, bright and steady, but the lake didn't react like it should. Since then, I've gone back to the lake a few times, sometimes with whiskey, sometimes alone. The night I saw the light, the air was different somehow. I can't explain it. Other nights, it's just normal, calm, quiet. My phone still works fine now. No blackouts or dead screens. Whiskey, he's never liked going out on the dock after dark since that night. He stays close to shore and doesn't want to look out over the water. I don't know what that light was. I'm not sure I want to. It didn't hurt anyone. Didn't say or do anything. Just showed up, drifted across the sky and disappeared without a trace. But sometimes when the wind's right and the lake is perfectly still, I swear I catch a faint glow out there, just under the surface waiting. The world tends to mess with your head after dark. I was walking on a trail near Asheville with Pippa, my dog, when I spotted something unusual. There, hovering silently, was an object that looked nothing like a typical drone. It was massive, around 10 feet across, with a flat, oval shape. The surface was dark and matte, completely devoid of any blinking lights or identifying marks. My heart started racing as I stopped in my tracks. This wasn't like any drone I'd ever seen before, commercial or military. Instinctively, I reached for my phone to capture the moment. The instant I pulled it out, the screen went black. No warning, no gradual shutdown, just dead. I tried everything to revive it. Power button, portable charger, repeated attempts. Nothing worked. The phone was completely unresponsive. Meanwhile, the craft remained motionless, suspended in midair, seemingly observing me. An unsettling sensation crawled across my skin, though I tried to rationalize it as nerves. Pippa remained calm, her tail wagging as she looked up at me expectantly. After a few minutes of uncertainty, I decided to head back toward the trailhead. With each step, I kept glancing back. The object maintained its position, silent and still. By the time I reached my car, the phone was still dead. At home around 6:30, as the sun quickly set, I examined the device closely. No water damage, no visible issues, yet it refused to turn on. I left it charging overnight, hoping for a miracle. The next morning, nothing had changed. I called my tech-savvy friend Leah, who tried every possible solution. Hard resets, software restores, computer diagnostics, all failed. The phone remained completely lifeless. I spent the day searching online for any reports of unusual drone sightings near Asheville. Nothing surfaced. No police reports, no local news, no forum discussions about anything strange. Then, while sitting on my couch and staring at the dead phone, something extraordinary happened. The screen flickered to life, slowly booting up as if nothing had ever been wrong. When it fully activated, it was like nothing had happened at all. The trail was quiet, that midweek morning in early fall, with trees just starting to change colors and a crisp, damp air as the sun climbed higher. I'd been hiking alone, as I usually do. No distractions, just me and the path. My earbuds were in, more out of habit than anything, though. I'd earlier unplugged them from my phone, which remained off and zipped away in my pack. I was enjoying the occasional bird call and the crunch of leaves underfoot when suddenly something strange happened. A noise began in my earbuds, faint at first, like static, but with a distinct rhythm. It sounded like a conversation, but in no language I recognized. The sound was garbled and electronic, reminiscent of sci-fi shows depicting alien communication, as if an old radio was struggling to pick up a weak, distorted signal. I initially thought it might be someone nearby playing a prank or that my earbuds had malfunctioned, but my phone was completely off and tucked away. In the days following that strange encounter, things got even weirder. Pippa, my dog, started acting differently near the trail. She would freeze, stare intensely at the trees, and emit a low growl I'd never heard before. Once, she even refused to step onto the trail at all. I returned a few times to investigate, hoping to find some trace of the craft I'd encountered, but found nothing. Just normal forest sounds and no unusual lights or noises. My phone began experiencing random glitches afterward. Sometimes the camera would crash the moment I opened it, or the flashlight would turn on by itself for no apparent reason. Nothing critically serious, but enough to keep me unsettled. I can't explain what I saw that day or why my phone died. as it did. I'm not even certain it was something from this world. All I know is that quiet afternoon doesn't make sense, and whatever was watching seemed distinctly uninterested in being discovered. I was hiking when the noise started. I double-checked my earbuds. They were unplugged, just hanging there silently. But when I put them back in, soft sounds came through, making my skin crawl. Low, rhythmic sounds like voices talking back and forth, but not human voices. Something else entirely. I glanced behind me, expecting to see another hiker or someone nearby. The trail was empty, just trees and fading afternoon light. The more I listened, the more unsettled I became. These sounds weren't random. They felt deliberate, like something was trying to communicate through my earbuds. The forest seemed to change. The air felt heavier, thicker somehow. I realized I was holding my breath without thinking. Then suddenly, everything stopped. No sounds at all. No birds, no rustling leaves, just complete silence. I turned slowly, scanning the trees and underbrush. Nothing was there. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I decided to remove the earbuds completely. The moment they were out, the forest seemed to come back to life. Birds started calling. Wind rustled through leaves. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. Hiking back along the main trail, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Something had been following me, just beyond my perception. When I reached the parking lot, darkness had fallen and the lights were flickering on. I checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls, nothing unusual. I don't know what that noise was or why it came through my unplugged earbuds. I'm not someone who gets easily spooked, but that day felt different. Something was there just at the edge of perception, trying to make contact without fully revealing itself. I'm not sure I want to return to that trail alone again. Photography has always been my passion, especially capturing landscapes and the night sky. A few months back, during a crisp October night in northern Maine, I set out to capture the beauty of the stars from my backyard in Eastport. The ocean fog had just cleared, leaving behind a damp, chilly atmosphere. My goal was simple: set up my camera on a tripod, point it just above the tree line, and program it to take a photo every 10 seconds over 4 hours. I was hoping to catch a glimpse of the Milky Way or maybe even the Northern Lights. When I reviewed the footage the next morning, something strange caught my eye. As I scrolled through the time-lapse, watching stars drift slowly across the sky, an unusual shape appeared. At first, it was barely visible, dark and blending into the night sky. But then it started to change. The object wasn't like anything I'd seen before. It rotated independently, moving subtly as if hovering. Initially, I thought it might be a drone or a weather balloon. But then the colors began to shift, from deep blue to an eerie green, then to a dull orange. This wasn't normal. Planets don't glow and change colors like this, and it didn't match any aircraft-like patterns. Curious and slightly unnerved, I rushed outside to see if I could spot anything. The sky looked completely normal, clear and unremarkable. I showed the footage to my friend Lena, a wildlife biologist familiar with technology. She suggested it might be a camera artifact or light reflection. Her explanation made sense, but something didn't feel right. The next night, I repeated the exact same setup, hoping to understand what I'd witnessed. I've always been a skeptic about strange phenomena. I love studying the night sky, tracking satellites and planets, but I never expected to capture something I couldn't explain. Now, I'm not so sure about what's possible. Luna, my border collie mix with sharp eyes, was restless that night. We'd been outside longer than usual, the air thick with salt and pine. Around midnight, the wind shifted, bringing a low hum that could have been distant power lines or a passing plane. But something was different. Luna stopped and growled, staring toward the water. I followed her gaze but saw nothing at first. Then the camera caught it, a shape rotating and glowing faintly, its colors more pastel than before. When I reviewed the footage the next morning, the details became stranger. The shape's rotation wasn't consistent, sometimes clockwise, sometimes counterclockwise, while the stars around it remained steady and slow, drifting east as they always do. I started investigating. Local weather radar and flight paths revealed nothing matching the time or location. Over the next week, the pattern continued. Every night, the shape appeared somewhere in the frame, cycling colors and moving unpredictably. Luna remained on edge during these nights. Her ears would twitch, alert to sounds beyond my perception. One evening, I decided to investigate more closely. I brought out binoculars and set up a second camera with a zoom lens. Settling into the yard with Luna curled beside me, around 11:45 p.m., as fog rolled off the nearby harbor and the air grew colder, the shape appeared. Through the binoculars, it was oddly blurry, like looking through a heat haze or dirty glass. Colors cycled from deep green to blue to dull amber, with a faint pulsating glow that seemed almost rhythmic, like breathing. I blinked and looked away, then back. The shape had shifted slightly, moving slowly rather than jumping. The zoom camera struggled to capture it, with the image distorting and pixelating around the edges. An unsettling feeling grew. It seemed to be watching me as much as I was watching it. After about 30 minutes, it drifted upward and vanished. Street lamps buzzed softly, and Luna whimpered. The next day, comparing camera timestamps revealed something else unusual. The zoom lens camera was missing several minutes of footage. The time-lapse camera stood steady, its black frames crackling with static. I kept re-watching the footage, searching for any sign of something familiar, a person, a drone, a balloon. Nothing. This shape defied explanation, casting no shadow on the clouds and reflecting no light I recognized. Some nights, when the sky turned overcast, the shape vanished completely, yet I could sense something nearby, a strange presence that seemed to thicken the air and send low vibrations through the ground. One cold, clear evening after a late diner shift, I visited the side yard to check the camera. Luna sat quietly beside me, her tail softly moving. The camera's battery pack felt unusually warm, despite not being charged. The shape appeared again, low on the horizon, rotating more slowly than before. This time, something was different. Its surface rippled like water, with colors shifting strangely. An odd glow illuminated only the nearest pine trees, leaving everything else untouched. I moved closer, careful not to startle Luna. Suddenly, a part of the shape flickered, becoming briefly transparent, almost insubstantial. I quickly snapped a photo with my phone, but when I checked the image, the sky was empty, pure blackness where the shape had been moments before. Strange occurrences began mounting. Street lights would flicker when the shape appeared. My phone would lose signal or randomly restart. One night, I set up a motion sensor by the back door. Luna paced nervously inside. Around 2:30 a.m., the sensor detected a soft movement near the bushes, but when I looked outside, nothing was there. By morning, the motion sensor was dead, its batteries completely drained. That same day, I reviewed the time-lapse footage. The shape briefly appeared, but midway through the clip, the entire sky went black for 15 seconds before returning to normal. The stars remained frozen in place. I stared, rubbing my eyes in disbelief. No neighbors had noticed anything. No news reports surfaced. Just Luna and I, watching the sky, feeling the nights grow increasingly heavy with unspoken mystery. Luna's ears are always tense, pointed toward the horizon like she's waiting for something to return. The sky keeps its secrets, and I keep watching, camera aimed upward. Nights stretch long and cold, filled with silence that seems to grow heavier with each passing hour. I've been tracking these strange occurrences, logging every detail. My old Zenith radio, a wooden-framed relic from a garage sale, still faintly smelling of cigarette smoke, became my unexpected window into something unexplained. After decades of working with radios during my engineering career, I thought I'd seen it all, but then came the nightly ritual. Precisely at 11:47 p.m., 3 distinct tones would cut through the static. Beep, beep, always the same. Always exact. I started documenting everything: date, time, weather conditions, searching for a pattern. The oddities were precise. The tones wouldn't sound if I was even slightly off schedule or on a different frequency. It was as if some unseen mechanism demanded absolute precision. No variation, no additional sounds, just those 3 consistent beeps. Questions multiply faster than answers. The footage I've captured shows subtle shifts, color changes, strange rippling movements that make me doubt my own perception. Luna watches, unblinking, and I continue recording, hoping to capture something that might explain these nightly transmissions. Some nights I wonder if I'm imagining it all, but then the radio sounds, the camera captures something just beyond understanding, and I'm reminded that some mysteries refuse to be easily dismissed. I had an old Zenith radio that seemed to pick up something other stations couldn't. At first, it just seemed like random interference. I called the local AM station, and the technician brushed it off as nothing unusual. But I knew something was different. I started testing every radio I could find. My transistor, a digital set, even a shortwave receiver. None of them caught the strange tones like my Zenith. Just static on the others, while my radio picked up something distinct. My family thought I was losing it. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, scribbling notes about these beeps, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something important was happening. One night, after the tones finished, I waited. I hoped they might repeat or change, but nothing happened. Then, barely audible, I heard something else. A whisper, almost like wind moving through a distant tunnel. It wasn't radio static, something else entirely. I strained to hear, but couldn't make it out clearly. I checked the frequency again. Same station, same spot on the dial. That's when I became obsessed. I started recording the transmissions with an old cassette recorder, capturing the exact moment of the tones. Playing it back, the tones were pure and steady, but the whisper, gone. It seemed to exist only in that live moment. I tried to map the signal to find its origin, but there was no pattern, no clear direction. My house sat in a quiet neighborhood on the town's outskirts. The only nearby transmitters were the local AM station and a few police radio towers miles away. One clear, still evening, I waited on the porch. At exactly 11:47, the three tones came through, sharp and precise. Then I saw it, a light in the distance. Not bright, more like a soft flicker. It hovered maybe a couple miles away, a gentle blue-green glow. Higher than any street lamp or car light, I blinked, and it vanished. I tried to rationalize it. A plane, maybe a helicopter. But nothing flew over our neighborhood that late without making noise. The light had been steady, then simply disappeared. An eerie feeling had taken root in my life, a persistent sense that something was unfolding just beyond my understanding. The old Zenith radio seemed almost alive, tuned to a frequency that whispered secrets I couldn't quite grasp. Every night around 11:47, three distinct tones would pierce the silence, accompanied by static that sometimes shifted into what might have been Morse code or fragments of a message. My wife suggested moving the radio, but I refused. This 1953 model, with its tubes and dials, felt different, special even, somehow connected to whatever was happening. My notes, which I meticulously kept, began showing subtle inconsistencies. The tones weren't always precisely at 11:47. Sometimes 11:46 or 11:48. These small variations made me question everything. Was my perception playing tricks? Was my internal sense of time betraying me? Weeks passed, and the mystery deepened. The radio would occasionally change stations by itself, static filling the speaker. But then, just as mysteriously, it would return to that same frequency. A faint whisper started emerging after the tones, like a voice struggling to form words, always just beyond comprehension. I felt watched, tracked by unseen eyes through the crackling static. My family thinks I'm obsessed. My son laughs, friends change the subject, but I can't let it go. Something is happening, something I'm on the verge of understanding. Each night, I wait. The radio sits ready, a portal to an unknown signal, promising revelations that never quite materialize. Three tones. Static, a whisper, and silence. The night was quiet, just like the silence that followed what I'd seen. I was driving home from my usual night shift at the hospital in Spokane. The clock nearing 2 a.m. early spring hung in the air, cold but holding a whisper of daytime warmth. My car windows were cracked open, letting in the crisp night, while the radio hummed softly in the background. About 20 minutes into my drive, past the last street lights, where the highway opened into empty fields, something caught my eye. A light in the sky was moving downward, but not like any falling star I'd ever seen. This wasn't a typical meteor streaking across the darkness. Instead, it descended slowly, almost floating, completely silent. I blinked, wondering if my tired eyes were playing tricks. City lights sometimes mess with perception, but this was different. The light hung mid-air, maybe a few hundred feet above ground. No buzz, no crackle, just absolute silence. Its glow was soft, a steady amber color, neither bright nor flickering. I slowed the car, watching. The light was too distant to make out its exact shape, just a bright blur suspended in the night. Then, without warning, it shot straight upward, faster than anything I'd ever seen, like a bullet piercing the sky, yet still making no sound. Just vanished into the darkness above the trees. My heart raced, but not from fear. It was a strange mix of confusion and tension. I checked the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone else who might have witnessed this. Nothing. The road remained empty. When I got home, I told Sarah, my roommate. She laughed it off, suggesting it was probably a satellite or drone. But I know what I saw. Drones don't move like that. Not at that height. Not that silently. Something else was out there that night. Something I still can't explain. Now the watch by my bedside says, it's almost time again. Driving home those nights, I scanned the sky, waiting for another glimpse of that strange light. Nothing unusual appeared. Stars twinkled normally, and the sparse traffic followed its predictable rhythm. Small oddities began creeping into my days. My phone started acting weird, calls dropping, screen flickering randomly. The clock radio kept resetting itself, always precisely at 2 a.m. Even my apartment lights would dim momentarily, as if experiencing a quick power hiccup, though the building's main electricity remained uninterrupted. At first, I tried dismissing these incidents. I'm not someone who gets easily rattled, but that light kept nagging at me. Its movement was unlike anything I'd seen before. The slow descent, the eerie hover, then the sudden vertical climb. No obvious explanation presented itself. I checked tracking apps, searched for nearby aircraft, but found nothing. No satellites, no conventional explanation for what I'd witnessed. Maybe I was just exhausted from work, my tired mind conjuring strange scenarios. Yet something about that moment felt different, undeniably real. The silence surrounding its movement was what truly unsettled me. Something wasn't right, and I couldn't shake that feeling. I apologize, but it seems like the original text you intended to share is incomplete. Could you please provide the full text that you want me to rewrite? Without the complete passage, I cannot help you restructure the paragraph while maintaining its original meaning.